Streams. You can't change streams mid-horse. That ain't right.
Well, there for like 5 minutes, YouTube was saying live streaming is unavailable. Okay.
Swapping streams. Really? Meanwhile, at the same time, GitHub is like, we're having issues with our commits. Microsoft is like, we're having issues. Mosquitoes are escaping.
Okay, I just posted the new link in the chat on YouTube. Give everybody a second to jump over, and then we'll go right back through the intro again.
All right, I'll try to forget.
I dropped the link in the Zoom chat as well. Okay, it looks like everybody's jumping over. So, okay, let's start this again. Chris, Scott, you guys good to go? All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome again. For those of you who couldn't see the stream, which is all of you except for the three of us on camera, to the Friday 3D Printing Community Hangout. This week, we have Scott Latine, lead developer for Marlin 2.0, or well, for the Marlin firmware, which we're going to be talking about Marlin 2.0 tonight. And for those of you who don't know, who might be new to 3D printing, or just aren't familiar with how your printer actually operates, what sends the commands, what it takes your G code and actually sends it to the steppers, and sends it to the hot end and things like that. Marlin is the firmware that makes that happen on most of your printers. There are some out there that have their own custom firmware, and prior to Marlin 2.0, there were a lot of printers that were not able to run Marlin that now, because of Marlin 2.0, are able to run it. Tonight, we've got Scott Latine, and I also asked Chris from Chris's Basement to join. I can ask the softball questions. Chris can ask the hardball questions for Scott, and more technical things than even I can dive into. So just a real quick update for those of you who have not caught a Friday 3D Printing Community Hangout this year. We have a new format. One time a month, we're going to have a guest with a topic. Camera's locked to Scott. That's always good. Sorry about that. So one time a month, we're going to have a guest with a topic. One time a month, we're going to have an open hangout, which is how we started 3 years ago. This stream is actually, between now and the next stream will be the 3-year anniversary of F3DPCH. So we've been at this for 3 years now. And one of the things is we want to go back to the open topic where we start the night out. It's just a bunch of us hanging out, talking about wherever the conversation goes, whether it's things we're working on, new things in 3D printing, whatever the case may be. If you'd like to join that, go to f3dpch.com, and there's a form on there that you can. Llama's messing with me in the chat already. There's a form on f3dpch.com that you can fill out to join in those open hangouts if you're interested, and you can select the dates for them. Not every stream is going to be, it's not going to be a guest, then an open hangout, then a guest, then an open hangout. It may be mixed up depending on our guests' availability. So there may be back-to-back open hangouts from one month to the next month, things like that. The other thing that we're doing is on Patreon. Patreon supporters have access to 2 additional live streams throughout the month. They are not on Friday nights necessarily. Those streams will be pre-recorded for the public and posted on a Friday in between live streams. Our patrons can join in just like you guys are tonight, talking in the chat, asking questions, and can also join on camera if they'd like to. Those are, I'm calling Meet the Maker, which we're looking to spotlight different makers in the community and introduce them to the 3D printing community. It might be somebody who's just using 3D printing as part of their workshop. So that's what's new. I don't want to hold up the stream any longer than I already have. So Chris, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. I'll we kind of did this before, so I'm just going to go ahead and do it again. I'm good at repeating things, so we'll be good with that. But I'm Chris Riley. I'm a YouTube content creator. Most of it is 3D printing related. A lot of you probably already know me. I am a Marlin enthusiast, what I like to call. I know a little bit about Marlin here and there. I do a lot of configurations for people in the community. I do probably a dozen a week or something like that for the most part. You'll probably notice this time also I wanted to mention that I'm sitting down. I don't sit down very often, but I figured since it was after 9 o'clock my time that I'd bring you over to this side. And I actually cleaned up a little bit, so that's just for you. But you can find me on Twitter as well, Chris Riley 3D, if you want to hang out over there. And thank you for having me on the stream. This should be a good time. I know I've been talking about coming on the stream for years now, and I finally got to catch one on a Friday. So it should be good, and looking forward to talking to both of you.
Cool, thanks, Chris. All right, Scott. Go ahead and tell everybody where they can find you. Make sure to include your Patreon as well for Marlin. Yep. And go ahead and just roll right into Marlin.
Just if I forget to say any of the things, remind me. My name is Scott Latine. I'm the maintainer of Marlin firmware these days, and I'm available on GitHub all the time. We've got a Discord. I have a Thinky Head on Twitter and various other platforms. I'm usually Thinky Head, so you can find me by Googling. And I got a website, thinkyhead.com, where you can kind of see stuff I've coded in the past. I haven't updated in a while. So it says, I'm off to do Marlin now, and then it suddenly stops. And so, yeah, I'm basically out working on issues and hanging around Discord or maybe the Facebook group and other places. So you can usually find me around somewhere.
Okay. So, Scott, what's some of the top feature list for Marlin 2.0 that's different from, actually, you know what? Let's start off with, for the people who don't know, let's start off with what Marlin is and what Marlin does.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what it is it's the firmware that resides on your board and actually takes care of sending all the signals to your stepper motors, to your heaters, and all that other stuff to make sure that everything's running in synchronization well. And it takes the G code from wherever it might be coming from, whether it's an SD card or your host, and it translates that into those instructions to do all that. And it's got a lot of other layers to it. It's got like a UI layer, it's got moving steppers layer, it's got handling my heaters layer and PID and all that kind of stuff. And it's pretty intense piece of software with a lot of different pieces to it, but it manages to coordinate them all to make that 3D printer do everything that it's doing while it's doing it, and keeping that plastic melting in an orderly way, hopefully.
Hey, Scott.
Yeah.
Check which microphone selected. If you click the arrow next to the mic,
I like this one.
Oh, there you go.
But I have to point my face at it because it's kind of a condenser.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the chat was saying your audio was low.
Yeah, I don't mind turning it up a little here and putting it closer to my face on my keyboard even, because I'm not going to be typing much. So there's a lot of stuff that came along with the changes, of course, from 1 to 2. I mean, on version 1, it only ran on it ran on a couple of 32-bit boards like your Arduino Due, which is, I don't know if it's strictly an ARM or exactly what, it's a SAM processor, and it's an Atmega branded, I guess, thing. And it's an interesting thing in the family because it's been on Arduino products for a while, and it is like 5 times faster than your Mega, but it just never caught on, became like the thing for 3D printers. So we were waiting around, and there were a lot of other things coming along. So I guess in a way, it's sort of like moving to 32-bit was just kind of waiting for this world to open up a little more. You had Smoothie Board and stuff like that. So that was kind of the next frontier, I guess you could say. So yeah, for all this time, it's been a little bit hobbled by the fact that it's running on those slower things, and not having as many maybe pins or timers or whatever else they have on them to give you like more freedom. And of course, memory and speed are the big things. So yeah, that's the essence of it. It drives your printer, makes it all work, and hopefully it keeps you safe as well to some extent. Make sure that things are not going to blow up too badly.
So when you're working on Marlin for different printers, I mean, because there's the options are endless at this point of the different printers.
Yeah.
What, how do you guys get to test on different platforms? Do you have access? Do companies send you printers? Do you have to buy the printers? How's that all work for Marlin?
Yeah, generally speaking, if a lot of features come from people who will have the machine, so or for example, a lot of the Trinamic stuff that's in there comes from the developer of the Trinamic stepper library and other people who have worked with Trinamics a little more and have them. And so it's sort of like, and I get donations of boards and step sticks and stuff to do testing, and I have gotten some Trinamic stuff from Trinamic, and I'm actually putting together some 5130s on the soldering iron today to do some testing with to see how they perform and stuff. And yeah, generally speaking, um, if I have stuff that I can test with, I will test with it. But I rely on a lot of people who either have the equipment or have access to, or know someone who does, or so a lot of stuff is secondhand, but we do a lot of back and forth and logging and other things to sort of ensure that we have checked out all the ins and outs of whatever that new feature or platform or thing might be. So yeah, that's how like for example, I have never had a Prusa MK, multi extruder peripheral, and yet it is in Marlin and it's trusted. And I went through and actually messed with the code and everything. But we can do all that even without having our hands on it, as long as we understand it. It's kind of like clean rooming the same way, like Gateway and those guys in the early days had to reverse engineer your IBM PC. As long as you know the interface and how to talk to it, and you try to get that right, and they haven't hidden something in the documentation or whatever, like you need to twiddle this pin to get it to start up or something, you can usually get things to work pretty quickly without even having to have it. And then you get people to test it in like a beta, or in our bug fix version. Like the bug fix is out there for people to like, oh yeah, I've got this new BL Touch and you've started to support it. And we don't necessarily mark things as experimental every time it's new, because we feel pretty confident we've been told it's good. But if it's fairly new, you can kind of take it as like it might be a little touchy. So the BL Touch, initially was like we got all the features in, but we weren't necessarily having them just set up right for each particular model. And it was like getting that tweaked so it was more clear how to get them set up for each model and get the defaults to be the right way was a little bit more work. And so it's like sometimes you have to go through that, or you find out that people have some weird configuration or some edge case, or they're using a bigger bed than your peripheral or your feature considers, or something weird like that. And you're just like, oh yes, of course. So you have to deal with these edge cases you didn't think of maybe when you were originally building something. So it can help to have the community give us feedback, and we get an awful lot of it just comes from people saying, hey, you broke my whatever. And oops. So we try to fix things as quickly as we can in that sense. But that also leads us down to towards understanding the pieces and parts better, so that we can support the next one that comes along that might be similar, and get that individual piece more solid as well. So
Now, with the different versions of Marlin, you have Marlin 1 um, and Marlin 2. Is Marlin 2 a complete rewrite, or is it just that far of an evolution of Marlin 1? How did Marlin 2 come about?
well, I mean, the big shift with Marlin 2, of course, one of the focuses, of course, the biggest was to be able to support 32-bit boards and just basically a wider set of platforms. And but on the other side of it was just that it needed to be continuing in the same direction of refactoring the code, because originally it was adapted from a couple of different sources which didn't necessarily um, fit together perfectly. They were fine in the sense that it's all good, well-written code and stuff. It was just that it was written for C, a lot of it, and a lot of it was sort of written without the sort of future expansion in mind fully. And so it's like, and so we're taking and sort of encapsulating pieces into units was a big part of it. And a lot of that exercise was to just understand how everything fits together, where the dependencies were. And so going through that exercise was important. And one of the big parts was if you look at Marlin 1 and the marlin.cpp file has all the G codes are in that one file, all as functions. And we couldn't continue that way. So every G code is now in a separate file, somewhat organized into categories. And so you can just, if you have an editor that supports it, you can like hit the right key and start just typing the name of the file you want to go to, M42, and hit enter, and it'll open. So a little quicker to get around the code base for the developers as well. It does make the compile a little longer because there's more individual files it has to compile, and each one has to kind of like suck in the whole of what was compiled from the whatever it's including before. And so it's sort of like, it does make it a little slower, but as we go forward and as computers become faster, that'll become less of a deal. And of course, it just gives us the ability to like modularize things more. And I'm thinking a lot more in that regard, like how can we make a feature something that you could just say, drop in like a plugin, and it would become something that you could then configure and enable. And if you didn't want it, you didn't have to have it there. You didn't have to drop it in, which would also give the ability, of course, for distribution. You go to this other repo to get that plugin, or, and it's standardized for this version of Marlin or whatever. So getting to that point is huge, because it's, of course, it was originally created for a platform that has no memory and no flash space, and it was, we want to make it fit on these tight little boards and run lasers and things. And so adapting something that was written without these bigger considerations in mind has been, you have to do it in a very slow kind of evolutionary way, or the other alternative is to start from the ground up. But the thing was, you always had a moving target. It was like we had to continue to bring in features because stuff was always being submitted, and at the same time we had to be able to bring those over. And so there was a huge span of time where we had both 1.1 and 2.0 branches, and whenever something was submitted to one, I had to synchronize it with the other. And honestly, I don't know how I did it, because I don't have that kind of energy these days. But at that time, it was like the way to keep things in sync was to sort of make sure, oh, you implemented it for this, now I'll bring it over for this, until we had it ready to shift and say, okay, now 1.19 or 1.10 or 1.1x is done. Let's move on to 2.0. And getting to that point has been, was really just an exercise in patience for a lot, because some wanted to just like, again, tear it all down and start in a certain order. And it was like, from my perspective, it seemed more likely to work if we just took it apart bit by bit, and take this chunk that seems like it doesn't really belong here and move it over there, and that little chunk, and in that way, as the ant moving the rubber tree plant, we would eventually move the whole thing into a more orderly kind of modern code base, and start using maybe more features of C++, and taking advantage of some things that kind of maybe might neaten things up. It's still challenging because we still have this ethos of keeping it working on smaller boards and making it so that it can still compile down to something around 60K, with minimal features. And yet, that kind of does give us some restrictions in what we can do moving forward. So it's sort of like, now the challenge becomes, how do we maybe make a layer on top of what we already have now to make it so you could still have that tight build, but then also have the more fancy features that you might want for a 32-bit board that has more space, more power, more speed, and all that stuff. So it's a balance, but 2.0 sort of brings it forward in an evolutionary way, but also in a kind of a revolutionary way, since it is adopting a whole new thing. It's got a whole new layer in it. Whereas before it was sort of like very thin. It had, AVR and do, and that was it. And then it was like, okay, now how do we build on top of that? So that was a big thing. And then, of course, since it took so long to get 1.19 to 2, lots of other stuff came along with it, improvements that we didn't necessarily plan for, some things that were on the list, but a lot of stuff that just, came along evolutionary, features that needed to be supported, or printers that needed supported, lots and lots of configurations, lots and lots of boards files, just like endless amounts of those. It's been, overall, like, the shift has made it into something, I think, more monumental than it was when we started, for sure.
Kind of to jump in on you real quick there, Scott, there was a question in the chat. I know there, for those who asked questions before this, I've got your questions. Sean Gold, though, asked, you were talking about the 8-bit kind of restrictions that gives you. He was asking how long Marlin will support the 8-bit architecture, and if there's any roadmap on keeping it or dropping the support for 8-bit.
Our roadmap right now is on maintaining it for as long as it doesn't, completely restrict what we're trying to do. So if, for example, there's some, like, someone comes along and with an amazing submission that converts everything to run on a real-time operating system. If there was some way that we could make that pluggable and say, oh, you turn on this switch and now you're on a real-time operating system, that would be best. I would love to be able to do that and yet keep everything working on AVR. And I can kind of see some architectural ways to approach that. Right now, again, it's the idea of, like, we split up the Marlin thing and we get this big function that does the big loop. And I could see splitting up that loop into smaller pieces and having those be pieces that get put on top of, say, an RTOS. So but that it forces us to be creative, and I think that's good. And I have no, I really wanted to even be able to support like 64K boards, like, as much as possible. And I know that you can, with a squeeze it onto a 64K board even now. But, I was hearing from some of the folks who were really into working on those that at a certain point, it was just not becoming wieldy or fit on those. And maybe that was before we did more optimization or something, but I'd like to hear how well they work on them anyway. But in general, yeah, I'd like to maintain that and keep it, like, going forward so that, you'll still be able to get, like there have been some fixes from 119 onward to, like, the timing of the steps. And if we didn't have that on AVR, that would also be a problem on AVR. AVR is a little slower, so it's less of a problem, but it's still a problem. So it's like, those are the kinds of things that we can continue to solve without having to go back to the old code base and remember, oh yes, this is how we used to do it. We can kind of still think in the way that we're thinking now and work on it that way. So I feel like it's an advantage to keep it all together in one lump thing. At the same time, the disadvantage is that you have lots of those conditions, like, don't compile this or don't include that file. So to the extent we can break it up and split it into folders that we don't have to look at when it's this platform and that one, that's what I would like. So I don't know, we're going to try and move that way, but definitely keep it as much as possible for the AVR, as long as possible.
And kind of on that note, there's so many different directions that we could run with this conversation, but we talked about this a little bit before, but can you kind of give us an idea, the AVR versus the hardware abstraction layer that we're working on now, and how you took the jump from 8 to 32, but still get them to work on the same code base? Yeah,
well, the amazing thing is that how quickly it came together. And there were there's a lot of pieces that took us forever to get. Like getting all our serial and SPI stuff sort of sorted has been, tricky. But initially, Marlin was built on something called FastIO, which is really just a bunch of macros. And you can also find it encapsulated in a class where if you know the pin numbers that you're going to be twiddling at compile time, then there's no need for, like, calling digital write or digital read or any of those functions, which will very generally figure out what port and bit you're supposed to be talking to. So the cool thing is that everything is done in this really direct way, and it's faster. So, you're not calling functions, you're doing bit manipulation directly. And so because everything's doing bit manipulation directly, we really just needed to initially map all the appropriate pins for all the same functions from one board to another and get the timing on those things right, if they have different voltages, to deal with that. And we haven't really had to deal with that much. But really just to make sure that all the functions are appropriately working. So you have things like your steppers, which are, direction step enabled. They're very specific pins that do very specific things. They're just on-off switches, and they just go at various frequencies. So getting that part built in was the first part. And then the next part, of course, is things like what kind of timers does it support, and how many of those pins can you do fancy things like PWM on, where it does, regular pulsing without having to do any computing, and things like that. So being able to start to map those things out was really the big task. And there was never a point where we had a spreadsheet where we were like, you know, out there like, you know, generals on a war map trying to figure out where all the pins and things were. But somehow through our efforts of taking one and then just copying it and then changing it and then copying that and changing it and then sort of figuring out the commonalities and, you know, little by little whittling it down, we came to that point of having something. And it was never architected in it with a grand plan. It was sort of like, we'll build what we need as we need it, and out of that we'll get a sense of what the whole thing looks like. And then when things look the same, we'll try to bring them into one unit. And so it's a very ad hoc kind of way of developing, but it's sort of the way I think a lot of us are used to developing. Like, we don't necessarily know, but the best way to figure it out is to jump in, and if you don't even know the right questions to ask, you'll definitely know the right questions to ask as you jump into the problem. So that's kind of what we did.
Right. Yeah. How long have you been with the Marlin project? Like, what version was it when you started in on it?
I was maybe I helped with getting getting it actual to have version numbers was my first kind of task, one of
Okay.
my first early tasks. So it was sort of this 1.0 generally out there, and then it was sort of leaning towards becoming maybe a 101. So we put a 101 tag on. I think we put 1.0 on whatever was what was at the time, and then we just made 101 the next thing after we patched stuff up, and then kind of went from there. 102.1 I think was really the first one we were really happy. Like, it started to feel good. Like, we'd fixed up a bunch of stuff and it was like, hey, it's starting to get somewhere. And then so yeah, I was in that area, which was around 2013, 2014. So yeah, late 2013, early 2014, probably around then.
Yeah, I don't think I got involved until like 105 or something like that was when I first started in Marlin.
Yeah.
But it seemed like after 08, it really started to ramp up. You know, especially when we got to like 111, we started seeing versions like, you know, every month and a half or something like that.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, I say this again and again, but it was like I say, a ghost town. When I got there, it was kind of hard to get response, and it was sort of quiet. And but there hadn't been that huge explosion of like 3D printing as a world phenomenon yet. It was just on the cusp, and I was just discovering it myself. You know, it had been around for years, but there you have it. And yeah, so it's like, yeah, you know, it was there. It was just something to fall into. And so I think what happened was, once some things got changed, what happened was first people start to notice is those who have forks. They're like, this change is hard to bring into my fork. I have to do a merge conflict. I hate merge conflicts. I hate you. So early on, it was really hard because people didn't like the change. But then a lot of folks started to come around and want to contribute more because they saw things were starting to move, or they didn't like necessarily the way we did it. So it was like, this is better. And it's like, oh yeah, okay. So yeah, little by little, it just started to snowball and start to get more momentum. And I think that momentum has ebbed and flowed at different times. People come and go. And for, you know, as they have time, they'll come in and work on it. And as their lives get more busy or they get into other things, they'll disappear for a while. But, you know, throughout it all, like, there's always someone coming along with something new and interesting connected to the newest stuff that's out there or what we're doing. So it's like the flow is really steady now. I'm kind of liking the energy, and having the Discord and stuff helps too, because it takes a lot of it out of the GitHub realm and into a more conversational area. So that's kind of cool.
What is the best place for people who have questions about Marlin and installing it on a printer, configuring it, or about a feature, versus somebody who has questions about code that they want to help
Yeah.
commit?
First place to go, I would say, is go to YouTube and search on what you're trying to figure out, because there are more and more videos out there that are people demonstrating exactly what you're trying to do. And you can skip ahead and you know, to the part that matters to what you're trying to figure out. And, you know, very often, like, I solve problems where I just like having a YouTube video there while I'm trying to do something. So I can be like, oh yes, that part, I would have forgot that. So that's really nice. And it also is much more, I think it cues the memory better than like reading an article or, you know, whatever, I don't know, it depends on whatever your personal style is, but I think that's a great place to start. And then from there, you can try like the Facebook group. And if you hate Facebook, I don't blame you. It can sometimes be a little noisy, and it's, I mean, I'm getting 20 people a day sometimes coming into this group. So it's like, I can't imagine they're all enthusiasts, but maybe they all are. I hope they all are. So the Discord right now, I think, is one of the better places to go if you're into Discord at all, or if you don't mind it. It's, you know, it's sort of, I mean, it's just this endless scroll. It's like kind of like FTP, so it kind of has that. And if you ask a question, it might not get addressed. And so, you know, if you really have a real problem and you think it's a bug, if you're sure it's a bug, let's put it that way. If you're sure it's a bug, or if you have a feature request you're sure is not there yet or have been worked on, that's the last resort. Go to GitHub issue queue and post something there. But we don't like phishing expeditions where people will come and be like, I think I have an issue, but I'm not sure. It might be a bug. I would much rather people find out and confirm, or fairly well confirm, that it's a bug, rather than come to us for support there. And we've been you know, sending people away to these other places. So I have a sort of a list. But Tom's 3D forums, 3D printing forums as well, the ones that Thomson Lauderer runs, are really great. If you're a user of Octoprint, they have a great forum for that kind of stuff. And you can often get answers to, I'm not going to send people there for firmware questions because I don't want to annoy the maintainers, but you know, if there's something interacting with the host and you're not sure, that's a good place to get some answers about how the host and firmware should behave. And maybe you can come to us and tell us how wrong we are about how we're behaving with relation to the host and stuff too. So yeah, I'd recommend those general channels. I would love to have a discourse site in the way that, because those are pretty handy, but there's some people who like discourse and others who don't. And then that's just another thing to maintain. So I don't know. And there's also the marlinfw.org website. And that has documentation. You can just go look stuff up there. So again, if you're not into reading the manual, I understand why you might be reluctant to go there, but it is searchable. And it's an instant search because it's like, you know, we don't have a database or anything in the back end. It just comes right out of JavaScript. It's just a big blob of search text. So if you search it, it'll find what you're finding. We're looking for it pretty quickly. And we're documenting our G codes and all that stuff. So if you're not sure how G codes work, that's all there too. So that's one place to go as well.
All right.
Can't think of too many others. Twitter, I guess. 3D printing Twitter.
That's
Ask questions
probably
there.
not the most ideal place.
Right. Yeah.
This kind of goes along with the discussion. Mike asked in the chat, how hard is it to coordinate all the contributors and ideas? As a coder, do you find that management, that part of managing it is challenging?
Yeah. I mean, it's challenging on many levels. Sometimes, you know, because we're all human, and it can be hard, and sometimes people are stressed. And it's like, you know, when you're in a good mood and someone comes in stressed, it can mess up with your day. So I'm learning to be more just sort of even tempered about whatever's happening out there. So on that level, I feel much better about things. Like, you know, it's just, I just want the data, and I'll try to help you find your answer as best I can. And if I can't help you find your answer, I apologize. And if I can't fix it, I apologize. But usually my approach is to grab something like a bone and not let it go until, you know, it's like solved. So that's why I'm a little slow to get through issues en masse, but I try to get through each issue as quickly as I can that I do address. But in general, like, yeah, the biggest challenge here in terms of getting all things coordinated is that there's no central place necessarily where I have like a priority to-do list. And I wouldn't necessarily know where to put that on GitHub, which would be the best place to have it, really, because otherwise, again, you have to involve some other tool, go host something yourself, sign up for Monday.com or something, I don't know what, and then the other people have to sign up for it. So it's like, you know, if you really want to have something where it shows priorities of what you're working on and stuff, that's a bit of a hassle. And so it's hard to sort of get people on the same page and get a sense of what's being done. within each individual, and then, if you go to the issue queue, it is a rather massive list of just stuff that looks like, it can look like a real mess. And at the moment it is a bit of a mess because we have maintainers who like go and edit the title, which suddenly puts everything at the top. And it's like, where's the newest issue? I don't know. It's somewhere on page 3, maybe. So some of the challenges, like, and then I will admit there is a huge challenge right now that I have, and I really don't know how to address it, but I really want to address it, which is how to get people better who are trying to help to really actually be helpful. Because oftentimes I feel like they're imitating what it is like to go and be a helpful person on a forum, but they're not, and they're putting the words down, but they're not really thinking through what they're trying to do. Some people will come in and they'll contribute me toos, and that's not helping. Or there's theorizing. I think it's this, I think it's that. Until I have data, I don't want to talk about it, frankly.
Yeah, kind of.
So yeah. And so it's like, it's a time sink if that's the kind of thing that I have to see on 1,600 unread issues or whatever that I have right now. I don't have time to read your comment about this thing because that takes me probably a minute. Click on the link, scroll down. What is this? What's the context? I have to scroll back. Oh, okay, this is nonsense. Thank you. So it can be a bit of a challenge just to deal with the bulk of stuff. And the fact is that I really just want to work on the solutions. And so I'm looking for the things which are a genuine bug report with good data that leads me to something, and then how can I, if I'm going to go and not know the answer or need more help, how can I bring this person in and let's make it a team effort, and let's not get, competitive about it or anything, like whatever things come up. So those kinds of things become always challenging. So it is really that, and then just time maintenance as well. What should I do first when I get up? I guess I can go to the Facebook and Twitter first thing and check whatever. Okay, took care of that, and then so throughout the day, and then when do I finally get to the code? Around 1 a.m. is about the best time to start. It seems like, but by then it's like, do I really? So that becomes a challenge, is just the management of the time and getting to all the things that I really want to get to, and especially the ones that are sort of off to the side, like this configuration stuff that needs addressing, and other things that should to improve the user experience and make things better on that side. It's like there's a whole other side of it that needs to be addressed as well. So yeah, all that and just coordinating everything is huge. So I hope someone will ask me what the joyous fun parts are, because I want to be reminded of and think about what those are too. Because there's a lot of fun to it. I mean, I enjoy the process, and I'm certainly enjoying the challenge and learning how to make it all work. And it's definitely forcing me to work on things like process and just coordination and time management and all that kind of stuff that usually it's like someone else is taking care of that for me. You'd be here at this time and you stay here till this time and that's it. But when you're trying to do it yourself, it becomes much more of like an exercise in discipline. So that's been part of it too.
Let's jump kind of to the side a little bit with talking about that and time management. What are the ways that you use to manage your time? Just might help somebody in the chat. Like, how do you split up your day? How do you keep track of what you need to do through the day?
Yeah, well, I could use better tools for that, but generally speaking, I have, on any given day, I might have something that is like continuing over from the previous day, but there'll always be the daily tasks. So there'll be things that you need to take care of every day. And the best thing to do is to get all that, if you've got some project or whatever, get all the things that are going to bug you that you don't have done, that you could get done, out of the way first. And then you'll have more of that free space to like be creative and focus on the problems at hand. Make sure you've also fed your body and gotten the amount of exercise and whatever else you might need, sleep, socializing, fluids, and just in general, so I'm trying to, lean in the direction of doing that, kind of working that way, to seeing everything as being like not necessarily a obstacle to getting to the work, because that can be a problem too if you take it too much, take your work too much as like your life or whatever. But I would say, you know, in general, yeah, definitely have a balance, split that up as well. So, you know, the thing is, you can spend hours and hours on stuff and get nowhere, and then, you know, you go for a walk for 20 minutes and you get unstuck, and it saves you all that time you would have sat for hours. And so, you know, for me, it's like that's one thing I've been figuring out is like, I won't, if I see that I'm about to like get in a thing, or I'm spacing out or something, is like, you know, I'm going in circles. That's the first thing I'll do is I'll break the cycle and go and try and do something else, make tea, take a walk, whatever I have to, and just get into a different headspace and just forget about it for a while. Let the subconscious deal with it, and you know, do something mindless, because that can really help a lot. And you know, in general, as far as like balancing the issues, I mean, with something like this, it's endless, and so I think in any project you may have that. If you're a product manager, then you have a milestone. You can at least say we've gotten this close to that milestone, and so you can use those to help you. But you know, in the end, after the day after you ship, you're going to have that another pile, and there's probably going to be an even extra pile because the thing you shipped is now out there and everybody's trying it. So, you know, get used to that rhythm, and be ready for you know, as soon as you come back from vacation, being slammed, because it's going to happen. So yeah, those are the kinds of things that are sort of definitely hitting me now, more, and just because it seems to be very much at this point, it's a settled issue that this is my life. So it's just try and do that, and then, you know, make sure that your environment ultimately is set up, and your tools are the best tools you can get and afford, and that you're not, you know, frustrating yourself by, you know, doing too much work where you don't have to, and stuff like that can really help as well.
I'm gonna run down through a couple questions that were asked early on from the chat, just so that they don't get lost here at the end. The first one came from 3D Printing Llama. He asked, why stop the use of Atom? He said he kind of liked its interface more.
You'll have to ask the guys who make Platform.io, because when you go to their website, they say we're a great new tool that's built on top of Visual Studio Code. It's an electron, and then they go into all the spiel. They wrote us a while ago and said we're going to not support Atom, so we'd like you to, you know, be aware of that. And so for over a year, we've just been shifting away, and you know, you can still find ways or use Atom as an editor or and stuff, but there were I guess issues with it, or it wasn't fulfilling enough of the needs of the guys who make Platform.io. So I've also found that it didn't fulfill my needs just as a person writing code, because you couldn't do like multi-line regular expression search on multiple files and stuff. It just that just wasn't working, and I'm like, can you make it work in the next update? And it just seemed like, no, it's just a technical wall we can't cross. I'm sorry. So I was like, oh, well, that's silly. And it was also a bit slower than Visual Studio Code in terms of its UI performance. So in the run, I actually from day to day use Sublime Text because it's completely lightweight and has like, you know, you go to like change a window and there's no pause. It just changes window. You know, you go to open something, there's, you know, it just opens. There's no pause while it builds your interface out of HTML elements or anything like that. So it's kind of nice in that regard. It's just like nice and lightweight. And then I tend to turn to Visual Studio Code only when I need to build something. And sometimes because it has like a really nice Git integration, like I can really see very quickly where the changes came from and when this file was changed and when that line was changed, and it's just really nice to see that. So I might use it more, but overall, like, and the other thing about Visual Studio Code is that I am building a configuration tool inside of Visual Studio Code as a web application, which maybe you could do that in Atom. I don't know, but I don't have the time to find out. I only have one life to live, and I have to pick my platform. And I really, really, really like the fact that it's a full Electron stack, a full web stack. And I actually brought my previous configurator that I'd written in JavaScript and HTML, and I managed to shunt it in and make it work inside of Visual Studio Code in a tab. And I was like, wow. And that took me like a couple hours of finagling because I just didn't understand how to make it work because I didn't know anything about it. But after a couple hours, I got in there, and then I'm like, okay, so this is something I can actually build and work on. So I want to continue forward and make something that is basically like Octoprint, but for Marlin config. Well, for all things Marlin that you would want to have while you're inside your editor working with Marlin. So you'd have your configuration tool, you'd have your calculator for this, and you'd have your visual thing for your bed size that would show you a 3D view or 2D view of your bed, and all that stuff would just be there. You wouldn't have to, so I feel like, I'm sorry that, I love Atom. I think it's cool looking and it has cool themes and it's really neat. And I think all editors should move in this direction of being open source and like pluggable. And I think that it just needs some improvements, and maybe in the future it'll be up to the snuff where, and maybe even the Platform IO guys will have enough time to go back and make it work better in there. And also Visual Studio Code is a fully, it's like open source thing that works from the command lines. So you can actually, like inside of Sublime, someone made a plugin called Dev IoT, which does the same thing. It makes a menu which gives you, at least access to various options for building and uploading from Platform IO. And anybody could come along and make a really nice integration of Platform IO in Atom. But putting it on the Platform IO people is kind of, unfortunately, they just don't have the time and resources to do all of it. And so I feel for that. It's a big open source project, and they're getting a lot of backing, and they deserve it. But as with anything, it's like they can do only so much. So hopefully, again, maybe there'll be an initiative. But until there is, they got to pick their thing. And Visual Studio Code is very nice. So I don't see what Atom has over it. So I would have to hear more about maybe what its advantages are.
Personally, I used Atom for other things. So when because it was just an open source text editor, you can kind of integrate with a few other things. So when I found out that the initial documents were kind of written towards using Atom and Platform IO, when Atom started to get away, or Platform IO started to get away from Atom, I was somewhat disappointed. And I realized a lot of people were telling me that VS Code was easier. It was a better tool. But the way I do things, and I've been in IT so long, I usually gravitate towards the largest junky software that I can find, and I just stick with it because I don't like to change.
Sure. Yeah, well, that was unfortunate. I mean, I originally, when the docs were written for Atom, I edited them and set it up so that it had both Atom and VS Code, and I was sort of emphasizing VS Code simply because there were some deficits in Atom, and I was myself leaning away from it even before Platform IO decided to, and then in the next revision of the docs, all that stuff that I'd done got thrown away, and I was really sad. And I just never got around to fixing it because I was on to other things at the time. So it sat there for a while saying Atom, and I was like, so going back and rewriting it all and deprecating that stuff was one of the steps we took just after the 2.0 release, or just before or thereabouts. So yeah, sorry about the confusion there.
Now, the documentation, I have to say as well, nowadays the documentation is so far ahead of what it used to be. It's excellent. It's phenomenal now. So
that's good. Yeah, I really want to continue to improve it. I see stuff like the stuff that what's her name on is it Billy something on Twitter, who does these graphic art, like information design stuff. She's got some posters and things.
Is that Billy Rubin?
Yes. Yeah, she's got posters on sale and stuff of her designs of like showing, bed leveling, and here's what, how to design for 3D printing and stuff, and just giving some really nice visuals. And I was really inspired by that, and I'd like to see more of that kind of thing on the site, and have more visual explanation and more because nobody likes to read a whole lot when you can just show them a picture that makes it clear in like 3 seconds. So it would be nice to have more of those types of things and just make something that's somewhat more consistent in that way, and have a nice step-by-step guides and things like that. So that's the emphasis I would really want to bring this year, is like lots more good tools for configuration, better documentation, improving the user experience, making the UI more consistent and better, and all that kind of stuff, just because we have now the space to really think about that. With the 32-bit, we can, some of them have web servers on them and stuff. So, it's like, okay, it's time to do that.
Next question was from Chris Rakaki. He asked, he just upgraded to 203, and the section about is now gone. Is that supposed to happen?
Which one?
2.0.3.
No, I mean, which section?
The about section, I guess.
On the about section on the website is gone?
Yeah, he just, Chris, can you clarify that? I think you're still in the chat. He just said that he just upgraded to 2.0.3, and the section about is gone. Is that supposed to happen? Just rereading that to make sure I didn't miss something. I copied it.
Well, when I know what a section about is, I'll let you know.
There you go, Chris. Clarify your question.
Yeah.
Next question came from RC Maniac. He said, as you mentioned Prusa already, what kind of relationship, if so to say, he said, do you have with them, given their somewhat distinct fork?
Oh, you mean in terms of how we interact in the software and stuff?
I think that might be what he
well, it's interesting. I mean, they don't interact with the project in any direct way. They'll and I believe what they've essentially done is they picked a starting point with, for example, the previous Prusa firmware. They picked a starting point around whatever time it happened to be. So it might have been one of this 110 RC somethings at that time, and they fork it at that time, and then they just march forward and continue to modify it from there. I don't think they're bringing in a lot of changes from the upstream fork. And then with the same thing with 2.0, I believe they grabbed it at some point and then just marched forward, adding their mods and making it work with their machine as much as they needed to. And for all I know, they probably stripped out all the stuff that they didn't need. And I hope they did. Strip out all that Delta stuff and everything else. And just, went forward from there with something that worked on the particular board they were choosing for, say, the Mini, which is an STM32 of some kind, and with a particular screen. And so, they are taking advantage of the firmware. I got to use different words because that has a negative connotation. They're, I should say, making good use of the open source ecosystem to build on a foundation that is worthwhile to build on, to make their firmware as good as they could make it. And I think that's interesting, but there isn't a lot of feedback from them back to the project, and there isn't a lot of contributions there are some people who contribute to the main Marlin branch who also contribute to them, but there isn't a lot of cross-pollination. But sometimes someone will be like, I really want the MMU to work, and so they'll go over and they'll figure it out and bring it over to us, and that has been nice. And sometimes I have time to do that. I think I did that with the first MMU and a couple of other things that were hanging around in the Prusa fork. Their jerker algorithm seemed better, so I think I brought that over as well. And so little things change, but no, we're not getting huge stuff. They're not coming to us in advance and saying, here comes the Mini, and here's the config, and here are the pins, or anything like that. If we're going to get the config and the pins into main Marlin, we'll have to do it on our own, or someone will have to figure it out. On the other hand, Prusa is also a patron to the tune of more than most of other patrons right now. So it hasn't come on board for a while, so it was really great to have him come on. And so that was just this past month, so I'm really excited to have him as a supporter now. And we're gonna, I think it's just, I wouldn't have been able to do what I'm doing and help get sort of coordinate everything to the 32-bit level and sort of architect it into the sort of blob that I like at the moment, which is, it's not perfect, but it's better than it was. And to keep it moving into the better direction, I wouldn't have been able to do any of that if it weren't for like the patrons. And so like, it's definitely, I understood and appreciated. I appreciate being understood in that regard, that, it's only because of that, they have something that could bring in right away and make it work on their STM32 and customize to their needs and get it working the way they would. So otherwise they might have had to use Smoothie or something. So it's pretty good situation now. And the relationship only is getting better in general with the community. We've got a lot more company supporters and things. So, and a lot more recognition just in general for the work that everybody's putting in.
Coming back to Chris's question about the about section, he's talking the printer stats on screen. I guess when he upgraded, that all disappeared.
Oh, well, the option did move, but it's still there. You just have to enable it.
Okay, is that the enable LCD info menu?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, LCD
Okay.
info menu.
Keith ended up answering after Chris came back and clarified that. So
yeah.
There you go, Chris. Give that a try.
So there you go. It's slightly improved too.
Next one from the chat was Daniel Krath. Is there any method to make a feature only usable on 32-bit boards? I use a color sensor as a filament sensor. On an MK2, I use an extra blue pill and sent the status.
I see. Well, I mean, in general, like for something like that, you might even want to just use like I2C or serial UART or some kind of communication to your other board. I'm not sure where you're I suppose if you want to build Marlin on this blue pill is what you're saying. There are certainly, I mean, if you add a feature or if we add a feature and it can only function on 32-bit, like because it just uses up too many computes or whatever, then, there you have it. Like we'll throw a sanity check that says, this is probably going to blow up your AVR board if you enable it, but try it anyway. And, we can add things like that where we just put a wrapper around it and say, yeah, only build on this platform. So that's fairly easy to do. And then you just, if you want to write to the metal and just go straight to the pins and everything that you're using, you can go ahead and do that right in your code that you're adding on. Of course, it's not something we would merge until it was more generalized, but that's fairly straightforward to do, I think now.
All right. Next one. Actually, this is kind of good for a little bit of the discussion about Patreon and the Prusa relationship and everything. Mike NLTMW asked, at what point did you make the transition to make Marlin your full-time gig? And how is the best way for companies and individuals to financially support you?
Let's see. It became my full-time gig. I guess really I can only say officially in a supportable way. Probably around last year, but maybe 1.5 years ago or so. It finally got to a level where it could sustain my ability to live. Up to that, it was like I was doing a lot of like freelance, like helping with people like integrate Marlin into their stuff, and then just sort of living on the cheap. And but over time, it's ebbed and flowed. But yeah, so I could say that I've been doing it full time, but apart from my like freelance on the side stuff, like prior to this, I'd been doing like web development, and I jumped into like basically focusing only on Marlin itself exclusively, probably around 2015 or so was when so it's been about 4 years that I've been doing it pretty much full time. And as far as the best way to help out right now, GitHub has a sponsor program that they're matching. So for every dollar you donate, they'll donate $1, and that's for the first year. So that's really the best option right now. I can't think of anyone who's doing anything like that other than them. And so all that requires is a normal GitHub account. So those are free, and they're giving them away in cereal boxes. So the second best way might be Patreon, or there are other ways, but I have a page on my website, thinkyhead.com/donate to Marlin with dashes between the words. And that is that's just lists various options if you wanted to be more direct, or go to like something like a one-time, or sign on for whatever, just send me a coffee or whatever. That's also an option.
You said that was thinkyhead.com/donate-to-Marlin.
Yep. Yeah.
I just dropped it in the chat. Oh,
cool. Thanks. Yeah.
So,
it's open 24 hours.
So right now you said GitHub is matching the donation.
Yeah.
So after the stream, I'm switching my Patreon donation to GitHub.
All right. Don't tell Patreon. It's all right.
Let me know when that year's up, and I'll come back to Patreon then.
Yeah, I think it's actually 1 year from this past December, so probably the end of this year, I guess.
Actually, that's a good question. So GitHub's doing that. What after the 1 year of them matching? Do you know if they're going to be taking a cut like Patreon does?
I assume they get some kind of cut from like whatever the processing fee or whatever, but I don't know how much that would be. I have actually my first payout won't be until March, because I had to wait. There was some waiting thing, so we'll see how that goes. And yeah, they're also they are only matching up to the first $5,000 that you make during that year. So that is one cap as well. So, I might have to go out and announce, okay, everyone flee back to Patreon. But we'll see. GitHub might turn out to be fine, because but the thing about Patreon is that it is it's more of a communal thing, and I post updates there less often than I should. But I do try to at least periodically and in between releases, and keep people abreast of what's going on with me and with the project. And so that's a good option as well. And you get like Discord reward, which is like special color on Discord, and access to voice channels that others might not get access to on the Discord. So and I'm going to be doing periodic starting to do more like weekly Marlin Mondays or something like that. I haven't exactly worked it out, but we'll see how that goes. But essentially just catching up on what's going on and looking over the current issues of the day and seeing if we can't solve a few, and maybe talking about helping out the contributors who want to help out figuring out stuff, like how to help figure out stuff and diagnose things, because diagnosing and those kinds of forensics is one of the things that's probably one of the biggest challenges. I'd love to share that more. So that'll be starting up maybe this Monday, depending on my mood. So we'll see. I'll give it a rough try, and we'll see how that goes. And at that time, we can talk more about these various options.
Mike had a follow-up question to his support. He asked if large unmarked bills in an envelope at MRF or IRF would be okay for support.
Yeah, that actually works pretty well. IRF gave me a large sack of unmarked bills at the end of the event, and there were some rubles in there as well. So I guess we're all on the take now. So yeah, it's a fine way to go. Sure.
So Scott, you were talking about we were talking about kind of Prusa, how they took it and run with it, and then they developed from there. But what about, it's not necessarily the opposite direction, but what about guys or anybody? Okay, so this is kind of hard to phrase because we could go endlessly with this. Marlin supports everything. They're not just doing a Cartesian i3 machine. You can Delta, you can SCARA, you can Core XY, whatever you want.
Right.
What about people like Torbjörn Livingston? He did the hang printer. He took it made it into to do whatever he wanted to do, but then he tried to bring it back to make it mainstream in Marlin. How much work was involved, alongside him to get all of the measurements and kinematics were worked into the main branch where you could actually just build one and download Marlin and use it?
Well, surprisingly, on our end, it wasn't a lot of work. It was more just he submitted it in a fairly complete form. So it was like it was pretty much ready to go. And then I made him wait way too long. I feel bad about that, but I didn't have a lot of time at that point, and I was like, I really wanted to make sure and go over it thoroughly, because like I was probably very shy at that point because people were yelling at me for breaking things. So I was like, okay, I'll make sure this is definitely good and that everyone approves before I bring it in. So finally had time to get into it and go through it, and really it was just a matter of feeling confident about it, and then also just wrapping my head around it too. I wanted to make sure that I understood it, because it's introducing a new axis, and then in point of fact, I am in the process of porting it to Marlin 2 at the moment, and it's hurting my head just because I changed so much in terms of the way coordinates work, and it's like, oh, I locked myself in. It's harder to add more axes now, so I'm trying to find a more elegant way of doing it. But overall, it was surprisingly. I mean, you may have to ask him how hard it was for him to figure it out, but I think that overall, what he brought to us was in great form when he brought it. So
yeah, I've had a chance to talk to him about how he was able to get all that and add the D axis and all this stuff. I was super impressed because I was in the branch before it came to Marlin. He was just kind of doling it out with whatever he created. Super impressed with how he got that done. So
and it is surprisingly well, the thing about that extra axis is it's pre-computed, so it's coming in as like, here's this extra number and it's going to move this motor by this much. And so Marlin is very dumb about it. It's like, okay, I'll move it wherever. So as long as it has the right numbers in it, it's like it takes it and does it. So all of the real hard work was done on Torben's ends for sure. And the hard work now of like bringing it over to Marlin 2 is, in addition to hang printer, I really want to make it so that it not just lets you bring in one new axis, but as many as you could conceive of needing. Yeah. So, but really when it comes to that, it's like I have this envisioning of, well, we need the underpinnings of, you just need to be able to say, how many linear axes do I want? And what's the group of them called, and group them. And then, okay, I got this other set of linear axes and they're grouped. And what are their kinematics? I don't know. They go with the group. And, right now we don't have that. It's very much like, if you look at Marlin, it's like we have all these special cases. So it's here. Oh, this is what it does. So, it's scattered everywhere. So it's like the main challenge of that is really just that there's no like one place where you could be like, oh yeah, we'll just put hang printer in a folder and drop it in. And now you got hang printer. Because, it's like all over the code base. So it's
is that kind of the same thing for like Duet with their breakout X and tool changer? I mean, being able to freely define, okay, I have this many motors and they need to do this. It's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, like, I mean, ultimately, when people are saying they want to like create a new like modern code base that maybe could go forward but be 32-bit only, and supplant maybe Marlin in the future or whatever, or at least give us some alternative. I tend to point to RepRap firmware because it has a lot of smart choices and decisions. I don't necessarily cotton to the coding style per se. It's too neat for me. Does that make sense? It's almost too formal and perfect, but I could almost catch on to it, I'm sure, once I got more into it. But I feel like that's maybe a better starting point because it's like you don't have to worry about running out of compute cycles as much. No, not at all really. And you can use modern C++. You could probably use the STL and other libraries, even if they even have them for these platforms. And save yourself a lot of headaches that we have to put up with because we have to keep reinventing the wheel because we're dealing with going straight to the hardware so much. But I feel like, yeah, like if we were to break things out more into libraries, that might help a lot. And that's part of what the aim of encapsulating things is about. It's like, can we split this out into its own unit? And yeah, so a lot of that comes up. I don't know, is there any follow-up to that?
Well, again, every time I ask you a question, I think about 400 different things, because
Sure.
I've attempted Duet in Marlin, just using the do what's there, because that processor is there. It's just
Yeah.
there's really no defined pin configuration thing. You kind of have to make it up as you go along, and I didn't make it very far, but I have tried to backward, like MakerBot boards, Mighty boards, and things like that. I've tried to backwards back into those. Those are a little bit easier, but it is quite the event. I mean, just to figure all that out. So I'm very curious, because there's a couple of other companies now that are trying that same configuration with the 32-bit, and
Well, this might be a good video for you to do. It would be figuring out what the pinouts for the Duet.
Yeah.
I mean, I could do it, but the thing is, the way there's a function in Marlin called pins debugging that we added specifically with this problem in mind. Is like, we don't know necessarily what all the pins are on the board, and so we needed a way to test and confirm things, and also see if there are conflicts and stuff. So I added this thing which would at least show you like a list of the pins and what their names are, and then what their states are, and whether they're currently in input or output and things like that. And then other people came along and augmented that feature and made it better for other platforms and stuff. And so we now have this ability with just about any board you have anyone you have, to turn on M43 pins debugging and issue the M43 command to see the pins map. And then there's also commands in there where you can go into a mode where it waits for you to touch a pin, and then it puts out the pin number when you hit it. So if you're not sure what the pinouts are on your board, you can like connect a ground pin to thing, and then you can go and touch each pin in turn, and then you know what the pins numbers are. And so you can put those in your pins file and then give them names according to what you touched. And then you've got your whole pinout just from that exercise. So
and there's certain content, it being a content creator, there's certain content that I don't put out there because it's going to bring just the barrage of questions. How are you going to do that, and why did you do that? And that is one of those things. But I was actually using pin debugging to figure out a lot of things, and forcing pins open. They wouldn't necessarily open until you triggered them with debugging, but then you would know. But when it came, so like you brought the board up, the pin wasn't active, but if you forced it open, and that during that iteration, it would allow you to use the pin. So that's kind of how I figured it out. But again, it's one of those things. I'm creating this huge ball of twine that somebody's going to ask, well, how does that work? And then I can't explain it. I just put it together. I learned enough to get the video done, basically.
Yeah, well, sometimes that's all you have time for. So it's like, if it works, there's something we figured out today, or I was thinking about in engineering, is just like, typically you almost always have a situation where there's only two ways to do something. So if it's wrong, it's the only other way to do it is the other way. So if it's wrong, it's just reverse it. That's the answer.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah, it's probably the answer. It's very binary here in engineering land.
Absolutely.
We had a question from Tony Ryan in the chat. He said he has a E3D Cyclops mixing hot end and horrible problem with stringing. It clogs when I use retraction. Is linear advance the answer for hot ends like this?
Well, I mean, it depends on whether it's incurable because of something weird with the hot end itself. So make sure to eliminate all that. Make sure the throat is clear, and that if there's a PTFE tube in it, that's pushed all the way down, and all that kind of stuff, because little gaps can cause blobs to form, and then they just show up as extra material suddenly, and you don't know why. If you're using certain materials, you're going to get stringing, like PTFE or PETG rather. PETG, forget it. It's going to get stringing no matter what, virtually. But you can mitigate it in lots of ways. Of course, linear advance is good for certain things. Definitely, if you're using a direct drive extruder, linear advance is great. But if you're using a tube, it can be more challenging. But it's better. Obviously, the whole point of linear advance is really to somewhat deal with that springiness. So you just have to really, it may take more time to tune it. And sometimes it can come down to things like your tube is just, it's got too wide of an inner diameter, and your filament is actually not backing up when it's supposed to, or it's moving in jerky ways when you try to do retraction. So sometimes just changing the speed of the retraction or the amount of retraction can make a big difference. Sometimes you think retracting more is going to help, but then you get to a point where it gets worse because you've retracted more. And so it's like those kinds of tunings are really hard. The best way I think to do it is to find a torture test or something, like a G code that you can run that changes it as you're doing a tower or something over time, and then you just find the point where the setting is just where you think it's the best, and just set it to that. And if linear advance is one of those settings that you can find that works for that, then yeah, go for it. And there's a linear advance test that you can get off the Marlin website by filling in the form, and running that should at least give you control over the flow in that first layer kind of situation. But I don't know how well that tuning works when you get up into the higher layers and stuff, or maybe it's too low to the bed during the test or something, and it gives a different result. So whereas it'll be better when you get up to the top. So tune, but then be prepared to tune some more. And of course, yeah, definitely look for those physical issues, because they can hide things and they can be hard to find.
And then RC Maniac asked, as someone else mentioned, wishing to have Marlin on their Elegoo Mars, has there been any itch to try to get Marlin to work on SLA printers, though it's a very different system?
Well, in essence, yes-ish. If it's a DLP printer that has a screen, all you really need is a Z-axis and some kind of G code to run the Z-axis, and then you turn on and off the light on and advance your display, right? So there's really that's a fairly simple problem. But there is no formal we're going to put it on this Mars printer and it'll work. Marlin will run on the Mars until somebody brings us all the peripheral and pins definitions. We don't know, but it's doable. Someone did at one point submit galvanometer feature support, which would basically let you trace out a laser in XY and draw lines very fast. So you could do a laser galvanometer based one, and that would just be a single addition, which would run G code that moves in XY, but it would be moving a galvo instead of moving motors. So yeah, it's those things are both, they would probably be quick to add in general. You just need to have all the right data to get those things hooked up, and then flags to turn them on. But the Z-axis, and then I guess there's also the rocking, typically you'll have the rocking thing, so you might need to run a servo, or you may even have a stepper motor on there. It's your choice, but one way or another, you have these extra axes you would need to add, or extra peripherals that you would need to control. In the past, we would do that there's actually commands in Marlin. If you define a servo as just being a servo on this thing, you can just say, move the servo here. And so there's a direct command for that. And then there's also a direct command for set this pin to that state. So even if there's not a feature in Marlin for something, if it involves simply turning pins on and off, you can do it completely inside your G code, and you don't have to ever do anything to Marlin. So there's some interesting options there.
Going back to the linear advanced stuff, Old Curmudgeon said that the LA test NG code put 3 divots in his Ender 3 bed. He said it disables the steppers before the nozzle is cool, and at that low of a Z, the gantry, I guess, once the stepper set off, the gantry settled down, gravity took effect.
Right on. Well, the developers link is of that feature and of that particular form is actually on the page. you can go straight to his GitHub page and yell at him. But I'll let him know, and I'll look into what the issue is, and figure it out, what's going on there. Thanks for letting us know.
Chris, do you have more for Scott? Anybody in the chat, if you have questions for Scott about Marlin, about being the lead developer of Marlin, post them in the chat, tag Friday 3D Printing Community Hangout. So I try to catch the ones that aren't tagged, but those at least jump out to me. So
yeah, so about working with Marlin for so many years, and just kind of thinking to myself, because I've spent so much time on the 2560 processor, and then Creality comes with a 128, and then everything broke loose and things went crazy. But outside of that, I spent a lot of time with the 2560. When you develop something and you're making a change or you're improving something, what is the first processor that you go to? I mean, let's say back in the 8-bit days and now in the 32-bit days, is there a board you have on your desk that, well, I'm going to run it on this first because I know it works?
Yeah, I mean, I have a ramps, just here on my desk that I have a screen attached to, and it's actually a character display today.
Awesome.
And I've got a Max 7219 unit here, so I can show dots that tell me things if I need to. And it's pretty handy for debugging things that are just like logic. But yeah, as far as when you have to debug certain hardware, like what do I go to? Well, the printers I have here are, I've got a couple CR10Ss that are the workhorses. They're very reliable, and so they're the ones that I go to for testing features first, generally. And then if it involves a particular board, like a piece of hardware or processor or whatever, then of course I have to choose either the one that has, one of them's got an LPC 1769 board in it, and the other one's got an STM32 board in it. So I'll pick one or the other based on what I think is more representative. Right now, lots of STM32 stuff happening, so I usually pick that for testing things these days. Yeah, so there's also there's a lot of big tree tech, like SKR boards coming out with different sub names, Pro and Mini.
Don't I know it?
E and BTT002 and all these boards. And so each and every one of those is slightly variant, and they all have quirks, and some of them might even have issues that I'm not sure about. We're looking at, we're not sure. But I don't want to start rumors, but right now there's a lot of difficulty with us getting the Trinamic and SKR boards to be happy together. So maybe that's just us. So yeah, but right now, yeah, for testing stuff, I usually, if I'm only needing to test it on logic wise, sometimes I'll just pull out, I have this little test.cpp file, and I'll just throw some code in there and run it. Just be like, see if it works on my desktop right now. Okay, so it looks good. So yeah, sometimes I'll do that, but most of the time, yeah, I'm just running it on a board, and then an awful lot of times, I don't even test stuff. I'll just let someone else test it, take their word for it, if it seems like, straightforward.
Yeah, well, that's interesting you bring that up, because I don't know, I don't remember if we talked in person or if maybe it was one of the streams you had, but you talked about the dot display debugging, the panel, and that's all in there in Marlin. That could be really, really handy if you needed something like that to quickly run through that. Could you explain it just for everybody in the chat how that works?
Yeah. Actually, let me see if I can pull up an Exhibit A here, because I happen to have it. So
while Scott's doing that, Steven the Lightspeed said in the chat, everyone that uses Marlin should go give a single $1 to Scott's Patreon or GitHub. It's criminal. He's not getting paid more. And then he said, let's all go over to Patreon and give Scott $5. If he quits, we would only have Chris Riley.
Yeah. And I'm to the limit as I am. So any support that you're getting now, that's all I can give.
Yeah, we're both basically begging online for our living right now. But yeah, so yeah, and with that in mind, China, you really should have a program where you give all your citizens a 3D printer. Just saying. I think it would be great. It'd be like, remember when England gave out computers with the BBC Micro and had all that programming about bringing kids up to speed with computers, and then they became like leaders in computing? Well, guess what? It's time. It's time, China. You could do that. So this is a Max 7219, and this one actually has 4 individual 729 chips on it because you can chain them. And so this is actually a board with 4 of them. And you can control this using Marlin with the feature called Max 7219. And I've got a video that demonstrates it. And you can find it's called Marlin and the Matrix. And basically the idea is that there's certain things in, if you're doing debugging or whatever, you can't use serial output from, say, a interrupt routine, because that'll cause mayhem and things. It may cause mayhem. It depends on how your particular board implements serial stuff, and the serial library itself. Sometimes you can get away with it because it's just sticking stuff in a buffer. But there's some places where that's just not going to do, and you need to get information out more quickly. And sometimes it's very simple information. So this is a really great thing, because all you do is you just, say, hey, turn on this light, and it takes, only a few moments, because it's a very quick, like, shift register based like thing, and it'll just set the light on or off or whatever, and you can draw stuff or whatever. And it's just a great way to get information out and get some debugging and figure out like when and how things are happening, and do other kinds of tricks that for debugging purposes, that and I've actually used it recently. I had to use it because I was looking for some like weird like timing issue, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to do this. So I got it set up where I had like a line, and as each time the thing would happen, I would advance the line, and then from that I could get a sense of like, if it was nice and smoothly, great, but if it went and like did this pause, I would know it was screwing up. So it was like really good little debugging test. And if I wouldn't have been able to do that kind of thing without this, and the alternative would be, you'd have to hook up some fancy device with its own, monitor and screen or whatever. So with this, I can just say, yeah, turn on this row in this column, and or toggle it or whatever, and it'll just do it. So really, really good device for that.
Yeah, I just find it's probably just the the nerdiness inside me, but I find that really cool. Just to output it like that.
Well, the other thing
that's awesome.
Yeah, well, one of the things I wanted to add too is like, now that we have more memory and flash space, is like to throw a little alphabet in Marlin, so it could do like show your status as a scrolling marquee on one of these like 4 size ones, which have 32 by 8 little dots on them. So just scrolling by your status as you're printing, and it would be easy to add. And I've done it before. So, and the cool thing about these shift register devices is like, you just send the data over and it waits. Like, it can get interrupted. It doesn't care. It's just like waiting for that next bit to twiddle in the right direction, and it knows exactly what to do. It just don't care. So yeah, they're great.
Yeah, going to 32-bit. So I feel like Marlin, 2.0, I don't know how long it's been around, a year and a half. Some of the time gets away from me, but it's been around for a little while. But I feel like, now, I'm not saying anything bad about SmoothieWare. I'm not, but I feel like there were so many great boards that got overlooked because the firmware wasn't easy enough. Like Ultra Machine Arkham. It was kind of a high-end board. It was pretty expensive, but nobody ever used it because I think the firmware was too big of a struggle.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember that being like when it came out, it was like touted as being great board compared to what's been out there before.
Right.
And it's like one of the higher quality ones.
Yeah, but I think there was a lot of boards like that. Panicut boards, like they had Rearm, which was pretty cool, but they had also a lot of other boards, but all of them were kind of designed for Smoothie. I think if we would have went 32-bit Marlin, 2 years earlier even, I think everything would be completely different now. It's just it's like, I almost feel like we're in a Betamax VHS scenario here, where you didn't get a lot of support for it, but so then the other one kind of took off. But it's because I have a lot of those boards sitting around going, well, I could put Marlin on it now, but now it's not the thing. you know, SKR boards that cost $20 are the thing right at the moment.
Sure. Well, that's the thing. I mean, also, I mean, yeah, using a ramps board on top of a rearm, it seemed like, I mean, it's very sensible. You know, you've got this ramps board lying around, and you want to, you know, make use all those stepper drivers and all your other stuff that you were using already, and you just slap it on, and then okay, you have to cut your display wires and do this thing, but other than that, it's fairly straightforward. You just immediately make a switch, and that was kind of the idea, was to make it easy to make the switch. But the LPC 1768-69 wasn't, it was still priced pretty high, and I think it still is priced pretty high compared to the STM32s. ST Micro has apparently just the ability to sneeze and chips come out of their noses or something, because they're just whipping them out, and they're so inexpensive. And apparently they're also making a lot of them which are like over spec, and then just they're flawed, so they put them out with lower specs, and like they're just flooding the market with STM32 chips. So it's just like, it's the thing to do right now. It's the chip. And so it does make sense. But yeah, it was a very interesting time, because yeah, it was out there for a long time, but it wasn't yet to the point where it had that wider support. And certainly STM32 was late in coming, simply because it had so many variants and was so mysterious. And also the platforms themselves, the libraries and stuff, weren't quite there. And we got a lot of help in that regard from people like Chris Pepper and others who were actually directly involved in messing with the platform itself. So like, there's a little bit of, there's a lot of cross-pollination in that regard as well. It's like, there's the STM or ST Micro wants to get out more chips, and so they have to make a library that, is out there for the people like us in the embedded world. And then the people who make the library, they want a good application. And so Marlin is like ideal as a kind of a, showcase application for this whole new platform that you have. And look what's possible, and it only uses up half the space. So just imagine what you could do with even more. So
Right.
yeah,
They're kind of the same thing, not even just 32-bit Marlin, but with the stepper driver chips, Allegro chips and TI chips is all you ever saw, right? And now it just seems like there's an explosion. Trinamic has really done, wonders for that market, for us, for the 3D printing people. But there's all kinds of different ones now that do all these magical things that, I never really would have thought where we would be. Centralist homing is one of those things. I never thought that would be here. For us to be able to get it for $8 a chip or whatever it is.
It is amazing. And I have to give major props to Trinamic. I read their data sheets and I look at what they're accomplishing inside of these tiny packages, and I'm just like,
yeah.
It's so amazing what they're able to do. I mean, they're basically at the forefront of manipulating physics in way and electrons and stuff that is just like, way over my head. But
absolutely,
I mean, I get the more I think about electronics and the way that they work, like oftentimes you see this picture of like, hey, here's how your board is working. See, these electrons are traveling down these wires like this, and they start here, and they arrive here in these little dot-like ways. But what happens is the reality is that the whole trace is lighting up in between here and here. And and on your system bus, no matter how long those traces are, it's that whole trace that's lighting up or turning off. And that whole trace is where, you can tap in and get that information off that trace or whatever. So it isn't that nice, neat picture of sending us things flowing through. Everything is, it's more like there's digital logic on each side of these gates. And they're like, these gates are keeping that stuff from crashing over to the other side and messing up what's going on. These basically are gatekeepers. Without the gates inside of our electronics, they'd just be melting, basically. So, and what they do inside Trinamics with these gates is astounding. And at the same time, also mitigating heat loss and stuff like that is just impressive. Which reminds me, we just got Cool Step.
Yeah.
Finally added in. You can tune your Cool Step in the bug fix soon.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's something I didn't know. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, yeah, I don't know why it wasn't there before. So here we go. It's
well,
coming down.
just the looking at where those have come since 2100s to now, because like the
Right.
21 those were blazing hot chips. I mean,
Yeah,
they were just on this side of usable outside of a multi-layered PCB or something like that. But now
absolutely.
we've got 2209, which has pretty much the best of everything right at the moment.
It
Uh,
really is. I think it's probably the superior choice in all regards. And it's also, it's packaged for this application as well. So, whereas also the 5130 is also gaining support. But we don't have, it's overkill. It's got a it's got a full motion controller in it that we just have no use for at the moment. Um, but if you want to get down with that, we can definitely, that'll be something in the future, which, talk about, they'll heat up more, but the rest of your board will be like cool as a cucumber because they'll be doing all the work.
Yeah, I get asked quite often if I've tried a 5100, and I really don't have any need for one. I'm still trying to get over the 2660. So,
Right. Yeah. And nowadays it is just reach for the 2209s, and they're typically what we're finding on the new boards as well.
yeah.
So why they're great. They're great.
So, talking about the boards and different chips and everything, Chris asked in the chat, Chris Warkocki asked, is there any push for Marlin to reach out to a board maker to co-design a good quality board as a base?
Mm. Um, well, I've never personally reached out for that. I've been occasionally been asked, like, if we were to do a board, which chips should we pick, or and what's the best thing out there right now. And my answer has generally been, the thing that gives you the amount of power you need and costs the least, I guess. Because basically that's what's come down to now. And in a way, it's like they're almost a dime a dozen. It's like, I feel like, the thing, I think the answer for board makers now is like, if they've come down so much in price, like, make the stuff make stuff that you can get at maybe the same price point. Like, make a $50 board, but how much can you do on that $50 board now, given the state of the art? Like, can you add 4 extruders on that board, or what can be done? Or what other things would you even want to do on that? Can it have and then there's a lot of opportunities now for things like extenders, and things, because again, we're dealing with faster logic and stuff. So I don't know. Is that the full gist of the question, do you think? I think that
Yeah,
answers it.
I think so. And you kind of followed into a question I was going to ask you as far as, what your ideal, if you could put together a board with drivers and everything, what your ideal setup would be. But you kind of answered that with the cheapest that fits your solution.
Yeah, I mean,
Fits your
ultimately, but
problem.
obviously you want to have, get a good quality PCB maker with good, make sure your traces are awesome, and and all your components are solid. And don't skimp on the voltage regulators. And then as far as the rest of it, uh, any of the STM32 seems perfectly adequate to the task. I mean, we're talking generally about, it's just how many signals do you need to get in and out, and how many ways do you need to do that. And there are certainly a lot of clever ways you can, like, get a cheaper STM32 and then multiplex something, for example, and then you can take one pin and turn it into 10 pins, or something like that. So there are a lot of ways you can kind of get around the maybe the limitations of something that's cheaper if you're a little more clever in your design. So I mean, I encourage people to certainly try all those things. I think for me also, the one thing that I would like to see on boards now, I mean, if I was to get my ideal board, like in the range of price, say, of a duet board, I would say, could I get an FPGA on there that's programmable, and that sits on there and gives me like access to certain logic lines, maybe all of them. And then also I would want something where maybe you could have something like a neural net processor on there as well, or maybe just a second processor so you could run an instance of Linux. That would be fine. So we're talking BeagleBone Black, I guess, essentially, with an FPGA added onto it.
Yeah, and I'm not really quite sure because that Beagle Bone is a great example of that. I don't know, a couple of years ago at Murph, because they had a Beagle Bone with a shield, and they were going to combine the whole thing and make a 3D printer board. I don't know whatever came of that, but that idea has been done. I'm not quite sure why we don't see it more. You know,
Yeah,
with a Raspberry Pi essentially, something like that with that type of processor baked into a board already.
yeah, absolutely. And also more discrete logic. Like right now, like the idea of having like I can understand in a way, like we came up from, you know, a board that you could build from a parts list on reprap.org,
Yep.
and you know, you're not going to have the kind of, you're not going to build a fancy, you know, self-designed motion controller system out of an FPGA in there. But now, you know, given that these peripherals and these chips are now coming down in price, the amount of power that's now in within reach is incredible. So I'd say now is an unprecedented time. We've never had as much resource at our disposal to do any of these things that we wanted to. And so in a way, I could say they were the right idea, but you know, Clipper wasn't around early on enough, but now it is, and so it's better for that. And so I could see maybe more, you know, more of that type of integration where, you know, we start to look at where the best place to do this task might be. Like each each of these stepper drivers on a 3D printer should have its own motion controller, but they should also be coordinated motion controllers. So it should have a individual and coordinated motion controllers as a thing, and that should be become a more of a standard. And but they don't have to necessarily be the integrated ones on the 5130 5160s, but they could be, since they already got them. But I don't know how well those intercommunicate with each other, and that's, I think, the deficit that I'm envisioning for that kind of, for what we have right now in that regard, is just that since they can't talk to each other, you can't have them share share certain ramping behaviors. You can time them to start and stop at the same time. You can give them the same ramp and so forth, and in that way you can coordinate them and say go. But I feel like they're like S curve acceleration, or if we wanted to do that kind of thing, that's, I don't think that's available in there. And certain other things, maybe there is attenuators. I'll have to look at that, but because that's a simple function actually to make an S curve. If you really want to get down to it, you can even do it in the analog way. But yeah, so I'd like to see explore that more. But so yeah, my ideal is definitely one that takes more of the load away from the logic of what the processor has to do, realizes the standardizes on the stuff that a 3D printer needs to do, and sort of offloads that, so we don't have to think about it anymore. Motion control would be my top number one thing, just because it's the worst eater of all that computing power on your microprocessor on your AVR is used up in stepping basically, and figuring out how many and how often and all that. It's just ridiculous amounts of computes to just get to that point. And if we could offload all that, it would just open up so much more, even on the AVRs. And so, no, it's a good way to go.
Chris, you mentioned about like you're surprised we haven't seen a Raspberry Pi running a 3D printer, acting as the processor for it. Chris Warkaki posted in the chat. He said, "Look up Panda Pi," and I pulled it up and dropped a link in the chat for anybody who's curious.
Cool. Yeah.
Panda Pi is a hat. They have a hat for the Raspberry Pi to run Octoprint and Marlin side by side to control the printer.
How about that?
Raspberry Pi. So there you go.
Oh, look at that! Like two bugs in a rug. That's great. Yeah, I mean that's it's a great combination, Marlin and Octoprint. As I was mentioning earlier, I'm doing my first Octoprint install. I know it seems like I should have done one before, but I just never got around to it. You know, it's like that 80-year-old lady in Star Trek who never learned to swim. I just so I gotta say, it's like I want to make it like the dashboard of Marlin in a way. You know, I want to have something like that where I can just add buttons and stick things on them. And you know, there was a time when like Pronterface seemed like it was going in that direction, but then it seemed like it languished. because you can add buttons in there and stuff, and I've used them before, but it's just not, it's not a nice interface where you can lay it out nicely and stuff. But you can pretty much build anything. And I was looking at that mesh editor, the mesh visualizer, and I was like, oh no, this is going to become a mesh editor. And I already submitted my first patch for a plugin, and it was actually the mesh viewer, because I have this mode in Marlin where you can like have it output the mesh in OpenSCAD format, like with brackets and commas and stuff. And I was like, it can't read it. So I was like, well, I'm going to fix that. So now it can read my mesh, because there was no way I was going to reflash the firmware just to fix that. So, but now I don't need to go to OpenSCAD, so I don't know, it's kind of redundant. But the other thing, I'm like, oh yeah, it'd be great to compare meshes. Yeah, see how the two compare. Yeah, and like, so I want to add that in there too.
There you go. And now, see, if we could go through the slots, if we could pull up each slot, just send it what is it, a L1 through 8 or whatever. If you could pull up each one of those slots that's been saved as a mesh and compare them, like lay them over, that would be amazing.
But then there'd be no point. You could save 100 slots on your inside your Octoprint.
You could just keep going. You could have as many lumpy steel sheets as you wish.
Right. And the other cool thing is, like, when you go to like pick them, it'll just be a picture of your beautiful red and blue warped bed, and you just pick the one that you like the best. So I remember that one. That's definitely the bed on my warped CR10 over there.
Good old number 34. That's the guy I like.
Oh wait, there's the one that I flipped the glass over on. Hold on. Yeah. So yeah, so I can see all kinds of ways to like improve that, but I have to focus. I have to get, if I'm going to do these kinds of things, I have to put them into the configurator in Visual Studio Code. I can't jump into Octoprint just yet. I mean, I like it a lot, but and it's inspiring, but yeah, I got to fix the file browser in Octoprint as well, so you can actually like have folders and disclose the folders and all that kind of stuff and have it look like a proper file browser. And it can also do long file names. So I was going to have it do that as well. That'd be good.
Staying focused is always the hard part.
It is, because like there's my problem is I look around and I see all this, stuff, that all these rooms that need sweeping, and I don't have a broom or the time to sweep them. And like, it's like, if I only had the time to sweep that room, but I know if I start, I'll never stop. So that's kind of the hardest thing. But little by little, I'll poke around and improve things there as I find the time.
Excellent.
But I love it. It's great especially now when this is the other thing about it, is I'm sitting here, I'm coding, and I'm like, oh, I got to go test something now. Now I can just pull up the Octoprint and I can test what I'm testing, look at the data and be like, oh, there we go. And I can shut it down. And yeah, it's just great. So thank you, Octoprint. You saved my life today.
Sticking with the different boards and the development, Chuck Hellebuck's 3D printing or electronic projects asked, is the Arduino coding limiting where you can go with 32-bit, or would a more advanced compiler allow you to develop faster?
Well, it's not the compiler of Arduino. In fact, I would say we don't have any limits in that regard. I'd say the one thing that is slightly limiting is that they're using slightly different versions of GCC. So on some, we might have access to features that in the language that we don't have access to in others. So we kind of have to stay the lowest common denominator. But we're kind of shifting away from like this. Yes, there are things that you can definitely continue to build 32-bit stuff in Arduino IDE if Arduino IDE has something to support it, like the board or hardware support. So yeah, I mean, that's what I'm aiming for, getting it to the point where you can still build the stuff that will build in Arduino if you want to, and you can build stuff in Visual Studio Code if you want to. And if for some reason you get better results, smaller build, faster build, or whatever out of the Visual Studio Code version, then I'd pick that. They each also have different build flags. That's one of the things too. with Arduino IDE, it's kind of a hassle to change your build flags. Whereas with Platform IO, the build flags are exposed in the INI file, so you can just kind of more quickly see them and tweak them. And they're just, expected to be right there in the folder. So it would be nice if, if Arduino wants to continue to be more viable, to kind of like maybe move more in the direction of Platform IO in a bit. But at the same time, Platform IO is set up so that it can take a single code base and build for lots of platforms. And you can even set up your build like right now we have it where it just builds one at a time. But you could set up a build where, okay, start, and it would do like 10, and with different, and you could even do them with different settings with some scripting. So lots of interesting options going on there. Oh, you seem to be muting. Don't unmute. It also seems to be stuck on your screen. I'm not sure if it's just me.
Did it switch now? Or is it still stuck to you? Or me?
It is
Should
for
be
me.
stuck to me. Sorry, I had the mute on because my dog's upstairs barking.
Oh.
Chris Markaki asked in the chat, is there any interest to port over crash detection using StaleGuard from Prusa firmware to Marlin?
Yes. In some respect, I think so. Really comes down to, at first we had to get it into the TMC stepper library. We're waiting for that. So now that's been in there for a while. So I don't know exactly what we're waiting for, except for somebody to just implement it. But the idea, I guess, is, it'll be monitoring your X and Y all the time. And if it gets the signal that something bumped it, it'll rehome the individual axis that got bumped. And it's one of those features I'd love to get in there. And the thing was, it had to be generalized. And then, how do you deal with it on a delta versus, or do you even? I suppose the idea would be first get it working on the Cartesian like we usually do, and then deal with delta later and scar later. But and then so it's just it's gonna be in there. It's on the to-do list. It just hasn't been done. But I imagine it would be pretty quick for some clever person to do. I think the trickiest part is just the monitoring bit. Like, how often do you monitor? Do you have to do polling? And these diag pins actually do send they send a signal just as if you hit an end stop. So at this point, we can basically just piggyback on this thing called SD abort on end stop hit, which is set up to, if your machine for some reason goes weird during an SD print, it'll actually abort the print if it notices that you hit an end stop. So it's using the same exact kind of logic. And we would just basically hook that same logic and then just make it rehome the axis if it detects that an end stop got hit. So I think it'd be pretty quick to do. So we'll look into that. You could even insert just a G28X into the G code stream, for and that would probably do the trick. So I don't know. Why haven't I done it yet is really probably the question you should be asking. It seems like it'd be kind of fun. It's just one of those things that just haven't got around to.
Well, thinking about that crash detection altogether, so sensorless homing is one thing, right? We go to the side and we stop, and hey, I'm here, right? But now we have to decide on all these, even on just I3s. How much tension does it take to get your motor from this location to this location? Try to give some sort of sense of, okay, this sensitive setting is going to be this for this printer. Prusa,
absolutely.
They're supposed to be the same, right? Prusa is a Prusa. But then now we're going to take it to every printer and try to figure out what that setting might be to keep you from crashing endlessly. That might be.
Yeah, that's the thing, is we give you the ability to tune the threshold, the stall threshold, and you figure it out. So,
right.
We can, but the thing is that, this is one of the things is like, Prusa touted it as being really cool and neat. And it was definitely one of those whiz bang features that got people interested in his printer. But in practical terms, it's very prone to false positives. And so what you end up happening is you'll be doing some infill that has a lot of jagged moves, and it's generating a lot of torque when you do that. And if you have a heavy extruder or a heavy carriage or just a tight belt or something, suddenly it's getting false signals and keeps rehoming. And then you're calling us going, how come my printer keeps rehoming? And like, this guy, somebody gave me a printer for my birthday and it keeps rehoming. Why? Like, I don't know, what's stall guard? What's that? I don't know. He knew, but he died in a tragic accident. It's some of that stuff is hard to deal with. So, I mean, we'll give it to you, but at the same time, it's like, yeah, don't, it's each of those things is like, again, we're not a support group. So
Yeah.
it's like, we want to have to not push off those things, but
And I guess
I say, we'll give it to you and have fun. Go for
right.
it.
That actually makes the point better than I did. Most people that I know how to tweak these sensitivity settings and get it to work on their machine, but some people are not going to, going to have that capability. Well, it just keeps homing every time I walk past it swiftly, or
Right, and we do bury this stuff in the advanced configure menu. Although I think now we do have a trinamic specific menu, so that can help, I suppose. But who's going to look for a menu called trinamic? What does that even mean?
Well, I'm thinking, with the crash detection, the jam detection, all that kind of stuff. One of the most common things I see people recommending when somebody with a Prusa is, now I don't have a Prusa, so I'm only saying this from what I see on social media, but a lot of times when somebody's having an issue, you see the suggestion, turn off crash detection, turn off, at one point, I don't know if they still have it or not, but they were detecting jams on the extruder,
Right.
to pause the print and stuff like that. And people were just telling everybody, turn it off. And that could be, like Chris said, most people don't know how to tweak the settings to adjust the sensitivity. So the simple solution is turn it off and forget you had it.
Yeah, but that's the thing is I don't, certainly that's not I don't like people to come along and close an issue and like in the thing when they're like, yeah, I turned it off and it fixed it. Okay, bye. I'm like, no, I want to figure out what maybe caused, so sometimes, because this might happen for someone else,
Right.
So, but oftentimes, certainly with something like that, the answer is all like, say, so we get this sometimes, occasionally we get this, my filament sensor, or, suddenly it goes into filament change. Why? I'm like, well, the firmware got a signal from your filament sensor saying the filament was out. I can't tell you any more than that. When it gets a signal, it does what you've told it to do, which is to run the M600. So, and I can't do anything for the problem that you've got a false signal on that pin. All I can tell you is we've got we've got this little counter, and if it goes above 5, that's where it will say, okay, that's a real hit. So I would say, yeah, make it 8, make it 10, and maybe it won't throw false positives, but ultimately you probably want to put maybe a capacitor on there or something to clean up the signal, move the wires so they're not near other wires, keeping them away from the motor wires, things like that. Like, but I'm not here to dole out hardware advice, but gosh, I've learned so much about hardware through the process of eliminating bugs. Things I've never touched, I know so much about, like, ridiculously.
RC Maniac said something in the chat about he never looked into it. Maybe that's why Prusa self-test calculates some random belt tension value. So coming at this from a non-Prusa owning 3D printing person, so does Prusa have like an automated calibration for the crash detection built into the printer?
They could certainly. All you'd really have to do is run the printer back and forth at certain speeds and see what kind of threshold
See
you
what
get.
feedback you get, yeah.
And then and then basically bump a little bit of margin above that, and then
Right.
or below that, or whatever it is. And yeah, so it's like a lot of things. Like we could tune for example, the probe offset could be tuned automatically. You put the nozzle at 0 and then you say, go tune the probe offset, put the nozzle on the bed, and then it goes, figure out where the probe offset is. And it would go and do a probe, and it would go, okay, according to you, the nozzle is here, and now it probes when it's here, therefore the distance is this. And you wouldn't have to ever enter it. And so, like, little things like that should be in the setup menu of these machines. And certainly Prusa can do that. They do something with the whole thing where they've tuned it to figure out the skew of the bed using the special spots on the bed with their doing these little zoomy moves back and forth and all that. Like, they had to go through a lot of data collection and get there to figure out what the best moves were and how to determine from those moves what the center of this this point on the bed was to some degree of accuracy. Like I imagine those moves are necessary to get it down to an accuracy of sub-millimeter, and yet it's moving pretty fast over that spot. But it has to do that to get just, and then at some point it can say, okay, what are the numbers, and we'll just average them out, and this looks like the best spot. And they can definitely do that for the torque and things. One of the other things that's great about the Trinamics, which maybe hasn't been considered as much, is that you can use them for that kind of stuff as test devices for the how well your machine is performing. You can see how much inertia there is on that axis. You can see how much by seeing the numbers that are generated relative to what the normal parameters are when there's like no load. You move nice and slow and you see that number doesn't go anywhere. You move up to a certain number and it's still fine, and suddenly you get up to some speed and it jumps. Like you might have some kind of resonance on your axis that's causing it to bind, or who knows what could be going on. But it's great for as a tool, and we could certainly leverage that for kind of doing more like setup and testing and debugging and stuff. That'd be kind of fun.
Chris said, as far as Prusa, the way it does it, its auto calibration, it calculates the motor resistance, self checks the current, and crashed into the X and Y, which sounds like a first time 3D printer owner when that crashes into the X and Y, but that makes sense. I mean, that would give you a realistic value, and then it adjusts accordingly. Like you said, it has a tolerance built into it.
Absolutely. And when you just you started at a real low threshold, and you try, and first you start off with like knowing that you're in the center. So you're not going to hit anything. Then you screw around all you want and collect some numbers. And in fact, point of fact, you could do it totally blind without knowing any of the resistance values, just looking at the feedback you're getting back from the hopefully at least somewhat tuned and ready to give reasonable feedback stepper drivers. So
Chris Rourkaki also asked in the chat when we will get the ability to have more than two types of filament. I'm pretty sure, and I kind of agree with this question, for the preheat settings. Right now,
well,
there's PLA and ABS.
I'm ready to jump on that. Actually, I've been thinking about that lately, and specifically, like just the way we do temperature now is wrong. So, what I want to do is basically have it so that when you want to set a temperature, you don't go and pick a number between 0 and 1,000. You scroll through a list of presets, and then you have one at the end, which is, do you really want to change it to something else? Or you start with the preset and it jumps to that preset as your starting point for editing. And if you're happy, you just go, okay, good. That'd probably be the best way to go. And so, yes. And then the other question would be, how do you enter on your screen with just a wheel the name of this new preset you're adding? Well, there's a couple ways you could go about that. You could have a selection where, okay, add new preset, and you select among a set of names that are already preset for you based on the material. And then you just, set the temperature for it and stuff. So yeah, we have to build an interface for that. Part of the thing that was holding us off was just, again, AVR, we don't like to add anything that uses any RAM at all if we can help it. So it was like just avoiding any feature that might use RAM. This is a case where I think it makes a lot of sense to use up the RAM. But as also by having it with a preset number of like names and stuff, you're not using a lot of RAM. You just like one number for which index it is, and the other number is the temperature, and then maybe you've got your other fan. You get your temperature, your fan, and then the third question you might have would be, when those damn standby temperatures coming on for our tool changers? And I don't know. That'll come soon too. I mean, all these are all things that are definitely on the list. But I really do want to have that select your material instead of select your temperature, because that is just dumb at this point. I hate going to that menu and going to anything where I have to select a number. Just is foolish. Other things is like, why do we go in increments of 1 anyway? You never want to go in an increment of 1. So for most sets of setups, you probably want to go in an increment of 5 most of the time anyway. So, but the thing is, the temperature is also, it is on an accelerated wheel. So if you go faster, it like goes faster, like your mouse pointer does. So I don't know. We keep working on that. But the other idea was, if you did want to enter your own name, we had to come up with an interface. We'd have to come up with an interface for entering a letter. So it'd be like, okay, so I guess maybe the best way would be to just have the letter spin in place where it shows an A, and as you spin, it changes when it's blinking. And as you hit click, it goes to the next letter. When you want to be done, like you go to the one that's the end letter, I guess, which is a little return character or something. So that was kind of the idea, but then you'd have to go like all the way to from A to Z. It takes a while. So having the preset names might be better. So I don't know. All these little things are like you'd have to build the underpinnings for it and stuff. But I do like the idea a lot of having the presets and skipping all this picking a number between 0 and 1,000. It's really dumb. And why doesn't it jump straight from 0 all the way up to the lowest temperature you're ever going to use? It should go from 0 to like 150 and never go below. And if you want to go lower, you can turn it left and it'll go lower. But when you go right, it goes up to 150 again. I like that idea. I don't know, something like that, just so you don't have to waste time.
Yeah.
Be cool.
Yeah, there's, whatever your cold extrude setting is, that's what it jumps to, or something like that. Like tie it to that setting.
Yeah. The other thing I want to do is like any setting on the screen that has like a range, I want to put a bar on the screen so you can see where you are in that range, get a sense of, your place in space.
Jay said in the chat, just ditch the knob and go with voice activated.
That's what I'm saying. It's time, people. This is 2020. What are you doing?
All you need is an Octoprint and a webhook for like Google Assistant or Siri.
Yeah. We need flying printers. That's what we need.
Yep.
All
right. Well, if there's any other questions for Scott, get them into the chat now. We'll get them answered in the next couple of minutes, hopefully. Chris, if you have any more questions for Scott, go ahead and throw them out too.
Well, Scott, I know we talked about maybe, I don't know, a long time ago, but what did you ever think of a good option for triple clicking the encoder wheel?
Triple click. Well, I mean, yeah, you could try triple click. The thing is, with any of these input events, even on your computer, when you click, there's a slight delay to wait and see if you're going to double click.
Right.
And with if you're done. So if we already have a double click function and a click function and a double click function, then you're gonna hit the click function, then you're gonna hit the double click function, and then you're gonna hit the triple click function. So, I think right now we have the option of click and hold, but with many of these devices, it seems to treat it like you're doing multiple clicks just in the hardware. There's no way around it. It seems to it must have an internal counter or something. So it just gives clicks as you hold it. So that was another option was, you could do a double click and then click and hold could be a separate input. Or, click while you're holding it down, turn. Like, I don't know. But yeah, you've got a click wheel. So, I feel like the best interface is to just make things as quick and easy to find as possible, and where possible, optimize those things. I don't know if we're going to get away from, there are certain things I also would like to have, like that debug menu would be nice, where you can here's the state of your end stops, in real time. You don't have to go to that M119 rigmarole, and here's your, current positions just, in a slightly more compact way, or maybe, XYZ vertically instead of horizontally, something like that, and there's a lot of other things you could do in that regard. If anybody, by the way, Billy, if you're listening, if you want to do consider try and do some new graphical screen layout for Marlin. That's things getting kind of tired, I think. And I don't know why the positions of any of those things has to be religiously where it is. There are other approaches that could be taken. So, certainly the status message, if it's not that important, it doesn't need to be visible all the time, so there are all kinds of little things that we could do to improve that side of it.
You mentioned the click and hold inputs, individual clicks. Was that in 119 too?
Yeah. There's a double click for baby stepping that came in, or
Chris is
somewhere around 115.
I'm thinking half the time to get the baby stepping, I had to triple click anyhow. because I'm
Oh
going
yeah.
too fast. So I'm like,
Yep.
okay, I'll just click and hold.
Yep. Yep. It does do that. It seems to just click and hold. Now, it works the same on the character as the graphical, and I'll have to double check, but I'm pretty sure we're not timing out the button press, because there's no reason why we ought to, unless we think that the device is unreliable and sending us the wrong status or something, in which case we could,
I have,
but we have a debouncer in there already and other stuff, so it's pretty smart already at this point. So yeah, that's the thing, is that the user experience is definitely the up and coming thing. I could kind of take a quick look at the release notes on 2.0 just to give a quick sense of anything nifty that came in that was of interest.
Sure.
Well, one of the things that was huge, and I got to give a lot of props to Marcio, who helped us out, who from Lulzbot. Like they put a lot of time and a lot of effort into like touch UI and like external displays that are based on serial, and created this whole extensible system, so supporting not just their displays but pretty much any display that we want to that has its own protocol. And so that was a huge addition. That was a really big one. So that's one big major change that makes 2.0 superior to 1, is just way more displays and peripherals are supported, including FSMC displays, which is interesting. That's a whole different way of talking to displays. It's almost like it's like talking to a memory controller. Like how you've got external graphics cards now, which seems like kind of weirdly mind-blowing. Like you can have something attached to the outside of your computer that makes it faster graphically. That's crazy. But this is similar to that. It's like having a separate memory, like adding memory to a computer, but the memory itself is just a display. It's kind of cool. So it makes it almost as fast as talking to regular RAM, which is neat. Heated chamber support, that was a good thing. People were kind of hoping for that, and there was a lot of customization around that already. Mirroring on your DualX, can you believe it took us that long? But I mean, a lot of this was there for like the past year, because the whole release notes for like 2.0 like encompass everything like that was done during that whole time. So there was like, we can flash the firmware from SD card if your board supports it. That's kind of cool. So like, the firmware itself can reflash new firmware, which is pretty neat. Coolant, and let's see what else. Oh, the cancel objects thing that came just actually, that was an ERF edition. If you remember, Paul Poxtelis is always converting printers into, or ice cream makers into printers and things. And like he did this really great job. He did this really great plugin for Octoprint that lets you cancel individual objects, and it'll actually show them to you like in a nice graphical view and everything. And so you can just click the object and it'll cancel it. And he added a similar feature to his copy of Marlin and brought it out with him to ERF to show off. And so we had that at our table, and I was busy implementing it, as we were trying to hawk t-shirts, and got a pretty good implementation by the end of the event, and got it in there shortly after. I wanted to use M86 as the code, but darn you, Prusa, you used M86 for something that was sort of related to M85. So, okay, fine. So I ended up using 486 instead. So it's got some relation to RU486, I guess. But yeah, so it lets you cancel an object. And the only thing you need to do is just add these codes to the G code, or do a pre-processing on like G code that comes out of your slicer, so that it can identify the objects and then know how to cancel them. So that's a pretty cool thing. Big deal if you're printing a lot of things and you don't want to like cancel the whole print after one turns into spaghetti. And then we did analog joystick jogging. So that might be a fun thing to try. Like adding a joystick to your printer is easy. Today, that's what we're going to talk today on
Oh, I
the
gotta try
basement.
that now. I didn't even know that was a feature. I definitely gotta make a video on that.
Wes Swain geeks. Pretty sure it's Wes Swain geeksmithing on YouTube. He took a NES controller for his CNC to jog it, so you can sit there and use the NES controller to move it around.
There you go. Oh, another one was, you know how I got complaints like from day one about XY on the display when you're printing, like is useless. And I agree, XY on your display is useless while you're printing. So it has an option now to just show the total E millimeters extruded. So that's a really nice option. I keep that turned on all my printers now. So you're like, how much filament did I use today? Oh my God. Actually, it's kind of scary because you look at it and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I used that much filament. But if it starts to get too long to use up to express in millimeters, it'll go down to centimeters for you. So let's see, 6 extruders, but actually we got support now for up to 8 extruders. So get your 8 extruder machines ready. The other thing we had to do is enable junction deviation by default, but now we're finding that people are having some kind of issue between interactions between junction deviation and like some trinamic features and other things. So your mileage might vary. Like linear advance was another thing that we kept, adding and fixing. And like between that and S-curve acceleration and junction deviation, like all of those things kind of interact in weird ways. So sometimes depending on your system, you get some strange results, but most of the time for me, they seem to work. So I keep them all on. I don't use linear advance that much lately, but lots of temperature sensors. Let's see, better photo triggering, more LCDs, hierarchical file layout, better HAL, and yeah. So I also even listed known issues here and there because sometimes we put out releases and we know there are things wrong with them. But so I'm going to put those known issues up for the versions that are out now. We've got some kind of strange issue right now with the bed mesh kind of changing if you do G29 without doing G28 in between. It's rather strange. But I mean, there's bound to be a little bit of imprecision, but I mean, it seems like it's off by a few thousandths of a millimeter, and that seems like excessive to me. So I want to figure out what's going on there.
Yeah, I've actually had that reported to me a couple of dozen times so far. So that seems to be something that's plaguing a lot of people, but I don't know the right combination of settings yet. I'm still trying to go through config and trying to find that. It seems to be mostly BL Touch users too, which sometimes,
Yeah, well, I did a bunch of data collection yesterday, and I'm not using a BL Touch. I was using an easy ABL probe from F3D, and it has it's a capacitive probe, and like I didn't have the bed on, so it's like probably not changing shape or anything. But I found that when I did 3x3 probes, well, first I was doing these 6x6 probes, which was taking way too long. But kind of good that I did because I noticed the data was changing by a somewhat pronounced number. Like each time the mesh was changing by a very definite, but different but definite amount. Definitely. And then when I did 3x3, it was less, a lower number change. So I'm thinking there could be maybe a little bit of imprecision in the movement as it's probing that could lead to this. I'm not entirely sure. There's other kind of solutions that we've considered approaching in the past, which is like, well, since you're probing, like every point that you probe could be telling you where 0 is. I mean, why trust your home, especially if you used an end stop? Like, who knows where that is? If you trust your probe offset and you trust to give you a nice first layer, you should trust it for your home too. And we are using a lot of us homing. We're using our probe for homing anyway. So during the probing, I could be correcting 0 through the whole thing and just making sure that it stays nice. And that would take care of it, I think. But I think it would also mask it. And I hate a mystery when I don't know the answer. So like, I kind of want to figure out what's going on first. And I noticed also I didn't have Z fade on. I was thinking that might be the problem. Like maybe the fade is somehow involved, but that's not it either. And some people will write saying, well, when I turn leveling on, like it'll say Z5 and then suddenly it's 4.86. What happened? And I turn leveling off and it's 5 again. Like, shouldn't it stay the same Z? And the answer is no. No, it shouldn't. Because if you can, and I don't know exactly how to explain it best, but one way I've tried to put it is, imagine that you've not turned leveling on and you've done a move across the bed. So your bed is all warpy. Okay, just for imagine it's off by a whole millimeter in the middle, and over on the right and left it's fine, whatever. So you go moving across without leveling on. As you get to the middle, you're now a millimeter further from the bed, right? Whereas normally, if you had leveling on, you would have been, following that contour, and you'd be at the distance of Z from the bed. So when you turn leveling on, now you're at the distance to the bed. So yeah, you're now going to have a higher Z number. And when you turn leveling off, now it's going to have a lower Z number because it's now reckoning back to as if you had leveling off. And it's, true. It's that number that's true to the machine. So some folks are thinking that maybe that's the number that is revealing the problem, but that Z number is going to change. So it's not a good clue. And unless you know exactly what values you're expecting, which you don't, you shouldn't be reporting that as an issue. So the real issue is if your mesh changes between G29. Look at the mesh and tell me how much the mesh values are changing on average. I've actually been doing this. This is why I want the mesh comparator in Octoprint, is because I could see, oh, each time it's going by this much. And if I compare each of these comparisons together, they all look the same or whatever. I could get a very clear sense from this nice graphical view. So right now it's like I'm kind of scratching my head because it's like I'm still looking at the numbers and pouring through them and trying to see what they really mean. But once I get down to it, I will find it and figure it out. And I'm sure it's going to come down to something along the lines of, this distance between or the probe offset or something in there is interacting. And if it comes down to some imprecision that you can't deal with, you can't get rid of, like one step, you go to position 8.3 and that's 1,522 steps inside the stepper routine. And then you go by this other value and it changes by one step, which changes by this amount. And then so this rounding error starts to accumulate by one step at a time. But usually a step on most of your axes is 0.004 millimeters. So it's not a huge number. So that's not going to be part of it either. So yeah, there's this particular bug that I'm looking for is huge issue, but I feel like it's going to have a simple solution. It's going to be something obvious once I find it. But right now it's just, if you have it, collect data, see if you can see what you can do that makes it appear and disappear. See what changes you make to settings that make the values or the amount that it differs on each attempt change. Like if it gets worse or better. I want to know what makes it worse, what makes it better, because that's the kind of thing that leads to an answer. Is like, it's like anything. You just keep trying things and pull these levers, and maybe one of them will make the candy come out of the slot. So that's what I'm hoping for here, is we'll find something that points to the real culprit. And of course, I'll be the person who has to like dive into the code itself and find out where it is. But if it turns out to be, in the G29, that, where you would think it would be, great. But, again, G29 is just, it brings in a lot of other stuff. So it could be in a lot of weird places. So keep an eye on that.
Old Curmudgeon said that TH3D said it had to do with having the enable after G28 feature turned on.
Turned off or turned on?
Turned on.
It doesn't. I tried. My testing has shown that the mesh is changing by a small amount, even with that feature turned off. So it may be more pronounced with that on, but it's still there with it off. All that does is turn off. The only difference in my particular setup is when I do G29, it's not turning off leveling before it does the G29. It's not, it always turns leveling off. Sorry. I'm not doing any G28s in my testing, I should be saying. I'm only doing G29s. And so the thing is, like, if turning leveling on after G28 I don't think that's the problem. I don't think that by itself is the problem, because, and also like, there's certain things, like I think sometimes we get this idea that, oh, well, I did this and therefore I fixed it. And so what I did and that feature that I changed or fixed must be the problem. But all it's really done, I think, is mask the problem. So I need to go a little further into it. And I am finding that it is subtle, but it's still there. And that's the case. It's definitely more pronounced with the 36 point versus 9 point was definite. I definitely saw a difference, and that's unaccountable because the values it's measuring at each corner were the same, and the amount that it would be correcting for at this corner, as far as if it's using mesh numbers and stuff, should be the same. But the bilinear interpolation might be a little different, so I could see that. So there'll be some interesting things to play with there, but I'm gonna continue to explore. I've been collecting lots of numbers. I'm gonna get back into it in a little while after this, and we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out.
Old Curmudgeon asked, how can I get 3 decimals in terminal like are shown on the LCD Z offset specifically?
Well, depending on which thing you're printing from the terminal, it'll have a different format. And some of that is just, what the coder decided made sense at the time. So if you want more like digits out on certain things, I grok. Certain things like if we kept the M114 output pretty sparse because it's getting sent all the time. So it's sort of like, then and it doesn't need to be that detailed for your host to be able to display that information or to know that. But I can see why you would want to have very high precision if you were doing something like correcting the position from the host and you needed to know what that position was to send it back to the firmware. So if there's certain features that you think should have more digits, just let us know and we'll change the formatting on those outputs.
Imagination Deform said, give me 42 digits.
You can't have 42 zeros on the end of that's all there would be. We can also do scientific notation, but that won't help. That won't help at all.
All right. Well,
thanks everyone.
Chris, do you want to tell everybody where they can find you?
Sure. Yeah, so this was a great chat, by the way. I really enjoyed listening to all the new Marlin stuff, and it's always a good time talking about firmware, even though I don't want to take it completely down the rabbit hole, so it's somewhat interesting. But maybe Scott and I can have a side chat about that. But anyway, I'm Chris Riley. I'm a YouTube content creator for 3D printing. Probably most of you know me, but I do a lot of Marlin stuff, and I try to make it as easy as possible to configure Marlin and take some of the load off the guys that are debugging things and going through the forums. So that's my main goal. And you can find me on Twitter, Chris Riley 3D. I occasionally post over there at some of the crazy things I'm doing, but that's about it. And again, thanks a lot for having me on here. I appreciate it.
Yep, definitely. And I didn't even say at the beginning, this was Chris's first time coming on F3DPCH. It's about damn time.
You said it in the intro, no one heard. So.
Yep. Yeah, in the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it was great to have him here. Thanks, Chris, for coming.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. You could do the more technical. I don't pay attention to a lot of the different drivers and stuff. It's just, for me, it's the hardware I have is what I have, and if something breaks, I'll upgrade it.
No, anytime.
So Scott, during your outro, RC Maniac asked a question like almost an hour ago, and I've been holding it for you. In addition to telling everybody where they can find more about Marlin, about where they can donate to Marlin, which I will drop that donate to Marlin link in the chat again. While you're doing your outro, he asked, what's something Scott would love to do if he had the money and time? Does not have to be Marlin related.
Oh, well, I would just travel, man. Maybe take a trip to Vietnam and get a little look at some of the world that's completely alien and foreign to me. That's what I would do more of for sure.
Okay.
at this point. And I would bring my laptop with me, and I would still work on Marlin while I was there.
Still do Marlin.
I would.
GitHub is, sorry, I'm talking out loud as I'm typing. Do you want to tell everybody, Scott, where they can find you, Marlin, and more info on Marlin?
Marlinfw.org is the hub. Then there's our Discord, which is called Marlin Firmware. So you can kind of find it. We have invite links posted around, and I can try and I'll give one to everyone here later. Let's see, where else can you find me? Well, I've got thinkyhead.com, but that's kind of dead. So you can go there and find my Donate to Marlin page, and I will be posting there after I get the site updated a little more. And just basically keep an eye out for these live streams I'm going to start doing. Marlin Mondays, just to keep you up to date what's going on. And I'll be spending a little time being really geeky, getting into the code, sitting on the corner of the screen and kind of going through features and things. So there should be some interesting stuff. And there may even be occasions when I get to get a little political and talk about what I'm annoyed about in this whole community of awesome geeks who do awesome things so perfectly that it annoys me. So yeah, we can do that as well.
Okay. I dropped the link in the chat, thinkyhead.com/donate-to-Marlin, and put a note on there about GitHub matching donations up to the first $5,000 for the first year. And that started in January, correct?
Yeah, thereabouts. I believe, about the end of December. So yeah, for this whole year of 2020, they're going to be matching. So yeah, it's a great time to join on.
Yeah, everybody, if you can, everybody should donate to Marlin. I mean, Scott's doing this full time, and really, if it wasn't for Scott maintaining Marlin, we don't know if somebody else would step up and do the job that Scott's doing or not. And if we don't have somebody who would have stepped up without Scott, Marlin wouldn't be where it is, organizing it. I mean, all the contributors that contribute to it is great, but you need somebody at the end of the day to organize it, to test it. And I know Lou helps Scott test hardware, and I always say Lou's the one who abuses the hardware.
Yeah, we're doing some laser stuff these days.
Yeah, I'm waiting for that. I wanted to ask you that, and I totally forgot about it. So what we're kind of joking about a little bit, Marlin expanding beyond 3D printers to CNC routers, CNC lasers, maybe even water jets. I mean, basically anything CNC controlled.
Absolutely. I want to see Marlin on Mars printing stuff for sure.
There you go.
Making things.
So if you can, please definitely consider donating to Marlin, whether it's via Patreon, via GitHub. Like I said, right now, GitHub is kind of giving Scott the best bang for the buck by matching the donations. So take a look at those links. What was it, Marlin? It's marlinfirmware.org?
Marlinfw.org.
FW.
Yep. And that's got it's got all the documentation, G codes, tutorials, and we're going to continue to try and fill those in and make them better, and link to some videos that people are making on YouTube as well, so that they're easier to find.
Before we close out, what is Billy Rubin's Twitter handle?
Not sure. It might just be Billy Rubin something.
I know if I say that, it'll be wrong.
Well, it's
Billy Rubin Make.
Okay, there you go.
I'm going to drop a link in the chat. Everybody go on Twitter and tell Billy that Scott wants her to help make visual aids for the docs.
She knows. We've already talked about it a little, but I'm just waiting for me to get my shit together. So collate and figure out what I'm doing. So
there you go.
Once I have a list of things, we can coordinate and get it going. But yeah, especially for this this configurator, I really want this to be something that people want to use to to set up their firmware. So
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Scott. For everybody watching, the next Friday 3D Printing Community Hangout is February 22nd, and that is an open discussion hangout. Anybody who would like to join, go to f3dpch.com, fill out the form for the open hangout. I forget exactly what it says, but it starts with open hangout up at the top in the menu on the website. Fill that form out if you'd like to join on camera. With now that we're using Zoom, technically we can have up to 100 people. Not that I I don't really want to see what a stream with 100 people at one time is like. So don't everybody rush there at once. But you can sign up for that. Patreon.com/howidoit, which is my Patreon, but all the money on Patreon goes to support F3DPCH. Pays for the website hosting, pays for the domain name, pays for podcast hosting, and hopefully once those costs are covered, looking at possibly doing some giveaways from time to time on the live streams. The other thing too that you can do and actually get something back for it besides just the streams, if you go to f3dpch.ptt.live, which is print that thing, J-Wall, who we had on 2 weeks ago, his Blender tutorials. So if you'd like to learn Blender, F3DPCH actually gets 50% with that affiliate link. So that pays for, you get a discount for using that, plus we get a kickback of 50%. So that actually goes to pay for 1 month of all the services for F3DPCH. So for those of you who have done that already, thank you very much. You guys are awesome and supporting F3DPCH through the next couple of months. So thank you, everybody. And we will see you on the 22nd. For patrons, I will be posting some interviews here coming up between now and next Friday for the one that's going to be posted on Friday. So that's it. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Mom.